Hello, and welcome back to And the Runner-Up Is. I am your host, Kevin Jacobson, here with my annual Best Picture breakdown. This is a return to the original series of And the Runner-Up Is, where I covered Best Picture races, and as I do every summer, I guess now to fall at this point, we'll be discussing the most recent Oscar year and discuss what I deem to be the likely runner-up that lost Best Picture to Oppenheimer, which I've chosen as Poor Things. So that's what we'll be discussing today, among many other narratives of this past awards season. And my guest today is a great friend of the pod, someone I've had on numerous times, including 2 Best Actress episodes covering 1930 and 1981. So, everyone from Gloria Swanson to Marsha Mason. He is a writer and podcaster at Next Best Picture and AwardWatch, co-host of the Halloweeners Horror Movie Podcast, member of Gallica also, and now newly minted member of the Chicago Film Critics Association. Welcome back to the show, Cody Dericks.
Hello, thank you for having me. And this series you do once a year, checking in, is aptly named because I do sometimes have a breakdown because of Best Picture, but
Yes.
not this year. I don't think
Oh,
we can talk
okay.
about it.
That's
But
good. That's good.
yeah,
We love not having breakdowns. Growth is
yes,
important. But yeah, very excited to have you on and talk about these films. And now that we have a little bit of distance from them, maybe we can have a normal conversation about them. I don't know. Things get very heightened on Twitter and other spaces that discuss these
you're
things.
kidding.
So, yes, well, I know I'm breaking news there, but anyway, yes, before we sort of get into it, just curious what your thoughts were overall, if you had any, of this past Oscar race, the Barbenheimer of it all, the, Anatomy of a Fall and Zone of Interest sort of coming out of Cannes and becoming Oscar contenders, the discourse, the Best Picture lineup. What was the vibe for you looking back on this race?
The funny thing is, and I feel like this is a common refrain amongst Oscar obsessives like ourselves, is that once a recent ceremony is done, you kind of delete it from your brain, and it takes a little
Yes.
bit for it to sit into long term, as opposed to, if you want to talk about the 1978 Best Actress race, I got you, and I know you got me too.
Oh, yes.
But so realigning with this year was interesting because I do feel like I kind of just moved on quickly, but
Hmm.
I think this is one of our better recent lineups. You have
Yeah.
a really diverse slate of films in terms of content. There's a great array of types of stories being told here and people telling the stories. It's not just, 10 white dudes, which is refreshing for the Oscars,
Yeah.
especially. And I think that this is going to be one of those years we look back on as a good lineup that ended correctly. The season kind of felt like it was moving towards a resolution, and we got that resolution, and nobody really seemed too upset by it.
Yeah.
Obviously there's some detractors, there always are, but not just Best Picture, but this entire ceremony, I was shockingly happy with the winners.
That's
And
good.
I agree. And even the surprise wins were, I don't want to say
Refreshing.
favorable because that's subjective, but refreshing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Things like The Boy and the Heron, perhaps, or
Hmm.
Zone of Interest winning sound, things we can talk about. But I think this is one of the better recent years for sure.
Yeah, definitely. I had a great time kind of following this Oscar race more from afar than I did in the past, quite honestly. I wasn't as involved in the constant discourse as much as I had been before, which was partly just the demands of doing this show, plus getting more involved in my job, things that are outside of that. But I just didn't obsess over things day to day as much as I had before, which is actually partly what made me appreciate these films, because it's like I wasn't totally sick of them. I think this is a lineup that will definitely age really well for the most part. And even though Oppenheimer was a very obvious front runner for months and months, I mean, I would gladly sit down to watch that and almost any of these other films again. I think there are very few clunkers in the race, which is nice. But yeah, excited to discuss all of them, really, because they all have really interesting roads to the Oscar. But we're going to kick off with a deep dive analysis into Poor Things and then delve into some of these others after the fact. But did you have any other things you wanted to get out of the way before we get into it?
I don't think so. I think we're going to cover it all in Best Picture.
Yes, definitely. Okay, well, let's get right into our main discussion here, which is Poor Things, which is an epic sci-fi comedy drama, sort of coming of age sci-fi dramedy, if you will, based on the novel of the same name by Alistair Gray, that tells the story of Bella Baxter, whose body is actually that of her mother's because this mad scientist found her having killed herself, and the scientist, Godwin, puts the woman's fetus's brain into her, essentially reanimating her, but with her child's brain, which means she has a very rudimentary understanding of the world. And so Godwin's medical student, Max, is fascinated by her, but then this very brutish man named Duncan takes Bella away to be with him, and we see how Bella interacts with the world in a very blunt manner and learning about sex and people exploiting her, but she continues to gain more knowledge to the point of maturing very quickly and realizing kind of what she wants to be in the world. So the film was directed by Yorgos Lanthimos and written by Tony McNamara, stars Emma Stone as Bella, Willem Dafoe as Godwin, Rami Youssef as Max, Mark Ruffalo as Duncan, Gerard Carmichael, Catherine Hunter, Margaret Qualley, Hannah Schlegel, and Christopher Abbott. So Poor Things made $34 million at the domestic box office, was nominated for 11 Academy Awards, winning 4, but not Best Picture. So let's get into it here. What are your thoughts? What were your thoughts on Poor Things watching it at the time, and what was it like to revisit it now?
How she describing this movie, it's like, how many of these do we get every year?
I know, my
Enough
God,
already.
another one.
Yawn. Anyway, the funny thing is, at the time when we all saw Poor Things about 8 months ago for the first time, most of us at least,
Mm-hmm.
I, like many others, was really taken by how different the film was, both in style and substance. I thought it was a really exciting, I don't want to say departure because she is an adventurous actress, but new lane for Emma Stone to take in her career. This
Mm-hmm.
is so different from her La La Land win. And maybe not so different for Yorgos Lanthimos from what we've seen, but definitely, again, exploring a different avenue of his perspective on the world and one of the more optimistic looks at the world for him,
Yeah,
which is
relatively speaking, right?
relatively
Yeah.
speaking, exactly. But on rewatch, I was a little, I don't think this movie holds up as well on rewatch, unfortunately, which is a little
Mm-hmm.
bit disappointing because I do vibe with so much of what the movie is going for philosophically, and in terms of worldview. The idea of learning about yourself as you grow, but kind of looking at it in this abrupt, really quick version of it as the film portrays is a really interesting way for me to look at the life we all live. And as somebody
Mm-hmm.
who, even well into their 30s, is still learning about themselves and their desires and what they want in the world and the kind of life they want to live, I really do identify with Bella. And I know a lot of viewers feel very similarly. And she's an amazing character. However, I do think the movie makes its point early and then often. And it kind of keeps hitting the same beats over and over and over and over and over again. And that's not to say that's a bad thing necessarily, because a lot of times repetition is essential for driving home a story's point. And in fact, that can be the point. But I don't think that has to be the case here. This frames itself as almost an odyssey, but it's as if Odysseus at every stop along the way learned the same lesson and kept encountering the same types of characters. And there's different refractions of those stories. There's different people that come into her life with different perspectives on how one should live their life or what life is all about. And those all kind of coalesce into the beautiful collage that Bella is, which is, again, reflective of how we all adopt different aspects of different cultures and cultural experiences and people into our lives, into the sort of quilt that is, personality. But I do think at a certain point, this 2.5 hour movie gets a little bit like, got it. We got it, girl. We get it. It looks pretty great. I do think it's visually fantastic, which makes up for a lot of the narrative shortcomings, I'd say. The screenplay is funny because it is well written in terms of dialogue. I think the character language is so specific. You get Bella's language right away. And even as it develops across the film, you still feel like she's in there as her true self, even as she's changing. which again, I'm going to keep repeating this, but speaks to the human existence.
Hmm.
But I do think the thrust of the story is a little repetitive. And again, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but on rewatch, especially, there's, I think, way less to delve into here than there may appear to be on first glance. I do still think this is a good movie. I think there is definite new territory that's being explored for not necessarily film in general, but maybe American audiences and modern American audiences. And this movie did well at the box office, so clearly it resonated with enough people, and it's on Hulu for all to watch now.
Hmm.
But I do think this movie, we can speak to its best picture chances later, but I think it is a welcome addition to this category, but I don't know if, at least from where I stand, it's going to hold up super well over time.
Hmm. Yeah, actually, I am in a pretty similar boat in terms of the changing relationship to this movie. Because when I saw it in the theaters, I really responded to it. I like the weird, sort of quirky steampunk energy it has. I thought Emma Stone's very go for broke performance is great, really daring. And I did like the kind of Odyssey nature of it and seeing her come into her own and the very gothic fairy tale sensibility of it. So I just enjoyed, the style of it most of all, I think. And I never actually revisited it until now. And I was very intrigued to see how it would hold up. And I think, sort of like you, I ended up liking it less on the second time, which kind of surprised me. I feel like I was just on a very different wavelength on this go from Yorgos and his vision here on this watch, and felt like I recognized that like a lot of the things that I responded to were maybe just the style of it and not so much the substance, because when I do look at the substance of it, I do find it lacking in what it's trying to be, which is the big coming of age journey about this woman and facing a lot of obstacles that women, especially in the Victorian period, sort of faced and continue to face to some degree, in having to just like put up with men who want to take advantage of them and figuring out sexuality and figuring out what they want in the world. I feel like for me, the actual story being told is surprisingly more simplistic than it seems and has a lot of missed opportunities, honestly, in terms of the variety of what it could have explored, that I sort of just feel empty by the end on this rewatch. At least I still laughed at some of like Emma's line deliveries, just really, just she has such a great comedic actress, and I still really admire the costumes and the visuals, the world building. It's very handsomely mounted, but yeah, the writing just feels kind of hollow to me. It feels like we're sort of scratching the surface of how Bella and, again, by extension, other young girls and women in her position try to grow as a person from bad experiences. But at a certain point, it just feels very watered down to her just enjoying sex a lot and her taking ownership of that, which sure is fine and valid, obviously, but I want more than that. And it kind of delves into philosophy and things of her getting involved in like, socialist causes and whatnot, but that feels very like not really delved into very much for me. So I'm just kind of like, okay, that was that. I didn't personally feel a connection to it on a second watch, which again kind of surprised me.
Yeah, it's kind of the film kind of reminds me of, for at least a big chunk of it, especially all the Mark Ruffalo parts where she's traveling with him, reminds me a lot of what it feels like to leave your small town and go to college. And you're like, oh my God,
Sure.
I can do whatever I want. And not to get too personal, sleep with whoever I want and do
Yep.
all these wonderful things and explore philosophy. And we all turn socialist for at least a semester in college, if
Sure.
not longer. So, it can be viewed as almost adolescent, but that is kind of the point of the film. So I can't really
Hmm.
ding the film for that. On this rewatch, also, it kind of reminded me, and take this as complimentary or derogatory, if you will. A lot of it reminded me of kind of the world of like Lemony Snicket, if you're familiar with those
Sure.
books,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
this innocent character is being met with obstructions constantly, and everybody in the world, for the most part, except for small brief glimpses of positivity, seems to be there to push them further into degradation or uh,
Mm.
cynicism. And, for certain members of society, based, around different parts of their identity. That is what the world can feel like sometimes, or is like, especially if it's built around uh, keeping certain people down. But at the same time, when you're cramming it into 2.5 hours, it can kind of feel like, again, we get it. We get it, Yorgos.
Yeah. Yeah. I would agree. Now I'm just picturing Jim Carrey as Olaf instead of Willem Dafoe. Just saying.
Well, hold on now.
Okay.
Wait a minute.
Anyway, I will say for me, just to go through the film sort of loosely, I really like the first section at the property house. The production design again in that section is just really beautiful. Those sets, the whole gothic aesthetic, just really, lends itself to the darkness of the story, and I think there's an interesting balance there where it's kind of suffocating to some degree for Bella, just how much stuff there is all around. And for as vast as this property is, you can sort of see how it is limiting for her. And it is like that being in your small town and, seeing all the things around you, but wanting to go further because she has such a adventurous spirit to her. And at the same time, it's like it's also very empty feeling because it's very echoey. So interesting sort of contrast there. And I like Emma's performance there. It's very fun and goofy. And, again, has always been such a great comedic actress. And some of the bluntness of Bella in that first segment really just suits her well. Just her love of just smashing things, the kind of mischievous look on her face
Relatable.
all the time. Yes, right. Still. And the very incongruous feeling, of course, of having the appearance of a grown woman, but really a toddler. I know that section, when I even first watched it, felt like it was going on a little bit too long, and you kind of wanted it to expand out to color and seeing the world and everything. But that particular kind of like Frankenstein-esque throwback was just visually arresting for me on both watches. And I wish we could kind of stick in that sort of like slightly melancholic, tragic darkness a little bit more compared to her expanding out into the worlds for me personally.
Right. And the switch from black and white to color is very obvious. We've been doing it
Yes,
since Wizard of Oz, but
right.
it doesn't not make an impact. You don't not see what they're going for, and it does set up a divide here in terms of chapters of Bella's life. And I agree, it does feel kind of like something to get over because you kind of know it's going to end at a certain point.
Yeah,
But I guess if the film is working to put us into Bella's headspace, then it's kind of like mission accomplished because I do
yeah,
want her
exactly.
to get out there and I want us as the audience to follow her along the way. I agree. I think Emma's performance in this section, I think she kind of won the Oscar in her first scene. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
we can talk about specifically that race, which was the most exciting acting race of this entire night, obviously. But
Mm-hmm.
I think seeing her physicality here, her choices, her toddler literally toddling around the sets, physicality is striking. And you immediately go, she's going for it. She's committing to this. She did her she did her research. She
Right,
studied. It
right.
feels like a very lived-in performance, and every single actor watching this was just both jealous and admired what she was going for because it's the kind of performance that you want to give. It feels very acting school. Today, we're going to
Yes,
go back to childhood. We're going to be toddlers. You're going to wander around the studio. You're going to smash things. Don't let anything hold you back. But that doesn't mean it's not exciting to watch just because it's something that feels either obvious or something like we've seen before. And she's
yeah.
so good at it. She's such a good
Mm-hmm.
screen presence.
Yes. And I think even though it is very chaotic what she is doing, at the same time, it feels very like she has the very intense internal logic to Bella, I guess, and just the things she would naturally respond to and react to among different characters or, things like that. It just feels very lived in, like you said, and very studied, but not necessarily in a bad way. It is just like when you do look at it on the surface, it feels very obvious why she won because it is just like, yeah, like you said, just like acting school showcase that any young actress or even older actress would be like, I wish I could get that kind of part because just imagine everything I could explore there. So, yeah, you get it. But I did want to talk about the whole section pretty early on where Godwin is telling the Rama Yusuf character, Max, about the origins of Bella as, again, the woman who killed herself, but also she has a fetus inside her, and Godwin took the brain and put it into hers. First of all, one thing that I wrote down is this very funny exchange where Godwin is like, kind of like, it was obvious what I had to do in that moment. And Rami's character is like, it was? But yeah, I think that does sort of speak to something I wanted to talk about, which is that I don't know about your perspective on this, but I feel like the film kind of plays its hand too early about like what exactly is going on with Bella and her origin story. So it kind of deflates some of the tension for me that could have been there because, Bella doesn't know her own origins at that point. It's something we only hear in a conversation between other characters. And I think it would have been just interesting and a probably different feeling film if we didn't really know why she was acting this way and had that limited point of view of just being in Bella's head for all of it and how she experiences the world. I had that thought on a second watch, at least.
I know what you mean, but the funny thing is, I don't view Bella as an audience surrogate. I don't think there really is
Yeah,
one in this movie,
the
which
film
is
doesn't either.
fine.
Yeah,
No,
right.
exactly. So I don't. I hadn't thought of it like that. I don't know if I personally need the movie to kind of hold its hand, or rather withhold its hand
Hmm.
in terms of her what she got going on.
Yeah, what's your
What's up
deal,
with Bella
girl?
Baxter?
Yeah.
Right.
Hmm.
And I wonder if I don't know Yorgos's personal whatever, but I wonder if maybe they got this out of the way early to kind of just get the audience to understand because there is some tricky territory there, obviously, with this
Yeah.
character that is starting out as a toddler and then not 20 minutes later is having a lot of on-screen sex. So I
Hmm.
think the
Hmm.
film kind of, I don't want to say it needs to tell you what's happening early, but I think without that, you would get a lot more bad faith reads on the film, which we got. Don't worry.
Yes.
People still had really weird thoughts about this movie, which is a weird movie. It invites those criticisms, I understand, but I I see what you mean, but I think the movie not being transportive into a character's head means we do kind of learn things linearly in a way that makes sense. I also do love the repeated bit of Willem Dafoe constantly dropping mention of the things his father did to him as a
Mm.
experimental surgeon. And
Hmm.
he'll, to your point, he tosses them off with such abandon as if, like, yeah, every parent does this. And
Yeah.
a character, usually Rami Youssef, is there to react to go, what? Oh my God.
Right. Yes, you poor man, poor child. Yeah. So, once she gets out into the real world, it is that real Wizard of Oz moment for her of, seeing all these incredible colors and sights and taking everything in. Wanted to just touch on the costume design, certainly very distinctive in moments like that, of just like that frilly blue jacket, I think is what I would call it. She has like the puffy shirt, of course, and the sort of yellow skirt, which is very distinctive. But, there's also an aspect to some of that design, I think, where it does kind of feel like a kid playing dress up, where it's just like such bold, loud colors. And it's just like putting everything on, kind of, which I think is actually speaking to the story, really, And I wonder where she got some of those costumes as well, because
Yeah.
we don't get like a shopping montage in the film.
Ugh, where was the Pretty Woman shopping montage for Bella
Right?
Baxter?
Yeah.
Big
Yeah.
mistake.
Huge. Yes.
Huge. Yeah, I love, 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 love the costumes in this movie. As a Tim Burton kid, this really just gave me everything I
Yes.
need. Very adjacent to that world. I agree. I think the element of dress up is really pivotal to Bella because she's out on her own, and Mark Ruffalo is not going to dress her. The first time she goes out in Lisbon and she's wearing a like yellow mini skirt with a
Right.
bolero jacket, it is
Yeah. Yeah.
very. I don't know what to wear yet because I'm figuring out my body, but these are clothes, so here we go.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of really touches on the eccentric costumes really lean into the idea of, this movie is set in the real world. They're going to real locations where
Mm-hmm.
we can go ourselves. And the movie has these title cards, these gorgeous like ink drop moments that tell you where they are. Lisbon and Athens, I think, is one too. There's a few places.
Mm-hmm.
And the costumes being just close to period accurate if this is a Victorian era story, but with eccentricities away from reality, I think helps sell the idea that this is kind of a parallel world. This is not, taking place in our real world, even if it is.
Yeah.
Um, why does my brain do this? My first thought is it's like the MCU where I'm like, yeah, they're in New York, but like it's not our New York, and there's
Wow.
different areas of the world that aren't real. But it's an interesting key into the audience to look at this more as like a fairy tale rather than something to. Uh, it allows you to check some of your real world hesitations at the door a little bit, or at least it did for me.
Right. Yeah, that's fair. Bella Baxter will return for the Avengers.
What was that meme where it was like, Bella, poor things, I need you to distract Thanos? This is a Disney movie, technically, so
It's true. She is a Disney princess.
sure.
Why not? Okay, so the stuff with Mark Ruffalo as Duncan, I think, has been very polarizing for people, and his performance even has been polarizing. I think that segment is, ironically, to use the word you used before, redundant, about him being like a jerk and her being socially inept and having sex all the time, and it's sort of just the same thing over and over again. But she does get some great, very blunt one-liners, and even though I mean, like, a lot of these were in the trailers and the promos even leading up to the film, but they do still make me laugh. Like when she's at dinner and she spits out her food and says, like, why keep it in my mouth if it is revolting? And of course the baby crying, and she just like puts her napkin down and is like, I must go punch that baby, There's a reason that they were included in the trailer, because they do really hit, and again speaks to her comedic timing, I think. But what were your thoughts on that whole section with Mark?
Mark Ruffalo's character is tough because he's playing the problem. He is,
Yeah.
I guess if you want to say, her liberation. He does get her out of her situation, which is essential for the movie and the character developing. But I do think similar to a lot of things with the movie, he makes his point early and often, and he
Yeah.
doesn't change at all, which is fine because he's not the center of the story. He's not supposed to change. But it does kind of become a thing of whenever he shows up, you kind of go, okay, now what? When he's there
Yeah. Very tiring.
trying outside of the brothel, or when he shows up at the end with Christopher Abbott, it does feel like, what's he up to now? And almost like a pantomime kind of way.
Yeah.
I think Mark Ruffalo does his best here. I just think he's not the greatest written character. Ruffalo's one of those actors where we wanted him to be recognized by Oscar for so long, and then when they finally did, they did it for not always the best work. I do think his first two nominations are pretty good, and then I don't love his work in Spotlight, and I think this nomination is fine, but if we had to choose between one male character to nominate for supporting actor from this film, I would much rather have them have gone with Willem Dafoe,
Yeah. Me too.
who was probably really close. I mean, he was definitely in the race, and it's, at a certain point, it became like a coin toss as to who to predict. I think I ended up predicting both just to cover my ass, if nothing else. But I think he does his best here. I just think the character doesn't vibrate joyfully within me.
Sure. Right. You don't want to do furious jumping.
Well, I didn't say that.
Okay.
Okay. Anyway.
Yeah, I think it is it's a very silly performance, I would say. And there are times when I feel like I see the expression on his face, and it feels very much like I'm just like seeing Mark Ruffalo playing a character at a certain point and not really fully going all the way over into believing him as this despicable sort of buffoon necessarily, which some people may enjoy. Just like you can see him really having fun with it. But then at a certain point, it's like, it just feels very, like in moments like that, it feels very theater school kind of energy. So the first real like substantial like female character other than Bella is Martha, played by Hannah Shaigula, who I wanted to touch on, this fabulous older woman she meets on the ship, who is, really suggesting to Bella that there's more to life than sex, more or less. Like what is important is also what's between her ears rather than just what's between her legs, and is opening up her mind to philosophy and different frameworks of how to think of life. And she's almost like hyper stimulated in this moment because she really never had this kind of education before and probably hasn't had that kind of relationship with any woman, really, I can imagine. So I do like the line where she says, ideas are banging around in Bella's head, which just like aggravates Duncan, of course. And you see this classic childishness of just not just him, but just men who hate when the woman in their life starts to wise up and prove that they don't actually need to rely on them for everything. The whole like born sexy yesterday is kind of the term that people use. But I think in Emma's performance, you definitely see this growing resentment that's like, this guy just sucks. Like, I'm outgrowing him, basically. And I also love when, like, after Duncan throws Bella's book overboard and Martha just hands her the other one that she's reading. But then, of course, he tosses that one overboard. And the look I love from Hannah there, it's like she's not even, like, offended by him doing this. She's just, like, amused by how childish and stupid he is. Like, she's not stooping to his level at all. And she totally understands. And she's probably dealt with other kind of children like this in her life. So anyway, I just wish we could see more of Martha a little bit as this sort of mentor figure for Bella.
Yeah, she's a breath of fresh air when she enters because it feels like somebody who's on Bella's level and is willing to engage with her as a person, which is a relief. And to your point, the first substantial female character besides Bella in the film. So, that's a little bit clear. If we're keeping the metaphor of this is what it's like to go to college, she's the English professor that you spend your lunches in their office hours,
Yeah.
Who can just talk to you. You call them by their first name, that kind of thing. Who helps you just discover more about the world outside of the things you have been taught in your small town or that you already know, which is essential to growing up.
No, that's absolutely true. Also, the scene where Duncan like wanting to literally toss Martha overboard.
Yeah.
And even when he's dragging like her in her chair, she's just like she doesn't even express any fear. She's just like, this man is so stupid, and just like pokes him. Just really fun. Wish we could see more of her. But also there's a whole section in Egypt where she sees the poor and is realizing the unfairness of it, the inequality, and it just totally breaks her spirit. But also we're continuing to see how everyone around her is exploiting her and her naivete, really. Like when, of course, she gives all of Duncan's money to men on the ship to give to the poor, which they run away with. Or like even when they go to Paris and the madam of the brothel, played by Catherine Hunter, is sort of convincing her to work for her because it's the quickest way to earn money. And she just kind of goes along with it because she needs money. Again, it's just like this building thing of just kind of everyone around her, outside of Martha, really, is just exploiting her in different ways.
Yeah, Catherine Hunter, when she shows up, is so exciting. I mean, it's just
the voice.
She's the kind of performer that I cannot believe exists in the same time as like an iPhone. She just is so of a different time.
Yeah,
her voice, her look, her physicality. I loved her in Tragedy Macbeth. I'm so excited to see whatever the hell she's about to do with Brandy in the front room. So that's going to be a trip. Her name dropping in that trailer was like Marvel end credits for me. I had no idea that was coming. It was so exciting. And yeah, everything about the whole brothel section I find really, I keep coming back to this movie makes me feel two ways at the same time, where I feel excited by it, but at a certain point, I get it. There's this long montage of her having sex with a bunch of different guys and experiencing different things and expanding their minds by seeing them as actual people before she has sex with them, which is all well and good. I appreciate it, again, philosophically, but I do think it overstays its welcome. Yeah, and I feel like I sound like a kind of attention span deficient millennial where I'm like, okay, hurry up, let's go. But it does linger in a way that I think is not fully necessary to understanding the characters or the film's intention, to the point where it just kind of feels luxuriant, which again isn't a bad thing necessarily, but I kind of struggle to see the reasoning.
Yes. I mean, that is where I start to feel like we could have explored other things outside of sex, which in this case, like, she is sort of taking ownership of her body and whatnot and understanding fully what she's doing to a certain extent. But I wish there was just more exploration of other things, as many critics, I think, have also said. I will say I do enjoy the moment of her finally dismissing Duncan, like when she's out in the snow and is so annoyed with him at a certain point for his getting angry with her, for whoring herself out, and sort of feeling like I can never win with you. It's like,
Mhm.
and I do enjoy when she's like, you're not marriage material. Like, this will never work out. Just the casual dismissal of him is great because it's like she just has no regard for his excuses anymore. And she has already completely moved on in her mind. And also when she follows that up with the reveal that she's been carrying money from Godwin secretly this whole time in case of emergency. And he just totally unravels. The line I really love is when she's saying, like, she thought that, you know, he would rise to the occasion and basically figure it out for himself, but he clearly didn't and never will. So now she has no use for him. Like, it's a very earned sense of growth, I think, in that moment, even though the fact that we're once again having another segment about sex is frustrating and redundant when there are so many elements of being a woman that could be explored. Again, critics have mentioned like menstruation and reproduction or just like general body changes that don't relate to sex necessarily. So it's like, yes, we have her becoming more educated and expanding her mind, but you kind of wish it would go deeper than it actually does. And that just does speak to me for how I wish we actually dive deeper into the actual growth of Bella and how she got from this barely like stammering through sentences in the first segment to this full-grown adult, more or less, over the course of what seems like a pretty short time. And yes, it's a fantasy. Yes, this isn't exactly our world, but I don't think that's enough to sort of explain away the exponential growth she has from sequence to sequence that just feels kind of like she has a conversation with one person and she grows as a person. She has this interaction with a stranger and she grows again. And I don't know, it just feels a little bit like we're missing some connective tissue at certain points, that it's sort of hard to take the journey as seriously as I think the film might want it to be.
And it's not like the movie didn't have the time to delve
It,
a little
yeah,
deeper into these
yeah.
aspects. This is a 2.5 hour movie.
Hmm.
It's funny because on one hand, the film demonizes Mark Ruffalo for wanting her to be, to use Best Actress terminology, his cool girl, somebody who's
Hmm.
sexually open, but just to him, and is
Right.
willing to go along with whatever he wants, and is open-minded, but only in his direction, and closed-minded to every other aspect of her life.
Hmm.
But the film also is, and I don't want to sound sex negative because God knows I am not, but the film is preoccupied with her as a sexual being. And that is an important part of growing up. I understand. But to your point, there is so much more to coming of age and coming into adulthood, biologically, physically, that the movie you would think, based on its subject matter, would want to explore, but it doesn't. So it kind of does just become Bella learns to have sex, Bella learns to appreciate sex, Bella now understands what sex means to herself and to others as a person with body autonomy and agency, and how that could be a source of power and empowerment.
Hmm.
And to make those points over and over and over again with different framing around them, but ultimately boiling down to the same idea, it's a little tiring. It becomes a little tiring after a time. And
Yeah.
this movie does feel like a poke in the eye to those who don't want to see any sex on screen. And I appreciate it in that sense.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, I think there's more to explore here. And to those who, again, don't want to see sex on screen, this feels like the worst example to point to because it does kind of just become boiled down to that. And you saw that in how the film got discussed.
Hmm. Yeah. No, it's very true. But to speak to the third act, too, I think that's interesting because we're seeing her kind of reclaiming ownership of herself. And definitely it's satisfying with the story that's being told. I do remember hearing from a lot of people who weren't fans of the film that the moment towards the end where Bella is marrying Max, and then suddenly Christopher Abbott shows up and objects to the wedding, it was like, oh my God, we're introducing another character at the 2 hour mark. Like, what is going on? I thought this was the end.
Yeah, and when people were skeptical of its chances in Best Film Editing to even get a nomination, which it ended
Oh,
up
yeah.
getting, they pointed to this as what is the pacing here? Like, it
Hmm.
really does feel exhaustive and exhausting. And when Christopher Abbott shows up, it feels almost comical. Like, you thought you were done, but you're not. We have another 20 minutes here where it's
Yeah.
again about a guy wanting to control her sexuality. We get it. And I do think there is, the film establishes that uh, Bella's mother, who she inhabits the body of, whoa, uh, did have a life before the film starts. We see her committing suicide. So I do understand why the movie wants to wrap that up or delve
Yeah.
a little bit deeper into it, but I don't know if it was necessary at this point in the movie or in this manner.
Yeah. The way it sort of disrupts the flow is definitely, jolted me, but I just in a vacuum kind of do appreciate that section in a way because there's just a level of menace that Christopher Abbott brings to it that does show for me how dark this story really is about, this woman who escaped this man controlling her by ending her life. And then she was reborn kind of against her will and went through similar abuse, quite frankly, and now has the maturity to recognize that and sort of maybe channel that discomfort in a different way than her mother, quote unquote, did. And of course, eventually taking him to the lab and transforming him into a goat, like it becomes this very absurdist Yorgos Lanthimos type of thing. But I don't know. I think it was necessary to kind of give us more of a impact as to like why she obviously ended her life. But I will agree that the actual editing on that was not particularly strong. It could have been much more finessed, I think, or even woven throughout the story a little more, even. I don't know.
Exactly. Although I
Yeah,
think they were going for a bit of a, I don't want to say shock or twist because it's not that, but
sure.
they want you to feel in this instance like Bella does, like who the hell are you? I
Hmm.
do, I understand that she's a character that we've seen kind of venture off and follow her immediate instincts, but I do question why she would even leave the wedding to go with Christopher Abbott. That doesn't
Yeah.
I don't see that being truthful to her character, who at this point we spent 2 hours with. It just feels like something that she has to do, which maybe
Hmm.
that's what she's compelled by. Maybe even you could say some aspect of her that is still related to the woman she was before she died feels drawn to this moment instinctively, but I don't know. Maybe I think I'm giving the film excuses here. I don't really. It just boils down to every time she makes this decision to leave her wedding to go hang out with Christopher Abbott, who enters in a threatening manner, escorted by Mark Ruffalo, who at this point she's divested
Yeah.
from. It doesn't really ring true to me.
Yeah. That's very true. But, again, to give it a more generous read, I think maybe it is just her continuing thirst for knowledge and trying to understand further. But I also think in the end, it sort of lets the Max character off the hook a little bit, quite honestly. I mean, I read from people who have read the novel that it is actually from Max's perspective, I believe, in a
Oh,
way. And
interesting.
yeah, and it kind of plays on his perception of Bella and how he considers her in a way that's kind of like unreliable narrator kind of stuff. And I think that may be another element of it that's like, a lot of men in this film are presented as total creeps who kind of fetishize her, but in a way that it's obvious for people watching in the audience and men watching in the audience to be like, well, I would never be that guy. And it doesn't really interrogate like Max as this kind of nice guy figure, despite him also wanting to marry her when she was still a child,
Hmm.
essentially. So yeah, I think overall it's like it's a film for me where the more I look at it, the more I do see those missed opportunities to explore something a little deeper from different angles.
It does always sit weird to me that he's hanging out in the end of the film in this harmonious
Yeah.
garden of progressivism, where it's Bella and her friend from the brothel and Margaret Qualley and even Allison the maid is drinking with them. It's this like you could see it as this beautiful feminist moment, but then there's Max hanging out here, who I guess to your point, he's the closest thing to an audience surrogate, and I'm not too surprised to hear that he's what the novel is from his perspective, because he also is in a lot of scenes when we return to the homestead to see him and Willem Dafoe hanging out. He's the one questioning Willem Dafoe, asking where Bella came from, probing him with these questions that we want answered as the audience. But it does the movie ends on this really triumphant note, which I think is earned, but it is weird that he's there hanging out with them, to
Mhm.
me at least. It does feel like a little bit of a chink in the armor.
Yes, I agree. So I think just to sort of wrap up here, I think as a surface level piece of just like dark, audacious, fairy tale esque entertainment, it's very original and very visually striking and hard to knock any of the craft involved here. And even Emma's performance is just, a lot of time and effort went into crafting this. I just wish the story was stronger for me to have as a foundation for all of that and give me more to think about than it actually does. So that's kind of where I land with it.
Yeah, I'm happy it exists, even if I have notes. I'm happy a movie
Sure.
like this exists and was a hit both at the Oscars and at the box office. That is on paper, I think, a win for
Sure.
cinema, for progressivism, whatever you want to call it. But, like all aspects of progressive thinking, I think there is divergences that could have been taken and notes to be given here.
Yes, exactly. All right. Well, when we come back, we will be delving into Poor Things at the Oscars and Oppenheimer and all the other Best Picture nominees and the films that maybe should have gotten in.
This is the time for the last award of the evening. And it's my honor to present it. 10 wonderful films were nominated, but only one will take the award for Best Picture. And I have to go to the envelope for that, and I will. Here it comes. And my eyes see Oppenheimer. Yes. Yes, Emma Thomas, Charles Roman. What happened?
And we're back. So now we'll be discussing Poor Things at the Oscars. It was nominated for 11 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director for Yorgos Lanthimos, Best Actress for Emma Stone, Best Supporting Actor for Mark Ruffalo, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Cinematography, Best Costume Design, Best Film Editing, Best Makeup and Hairstyling, Best Original Score, and Best Production Design. And it won Best Actress, Best Costume Design, Best Makeup and Hairstyling, and Best Production Design. So a pretty strong haul for a film that I actually remember people saying in their predictions could very well go home empty-handed. So, very, very good. But before the Oscars, Poor Things won the Golden Globe for Best Comedy Musical, and it won some regional critics' Best Picture awards. It also won the Golden Lion at the Venice Film Festival, so that was a big earlier win for it, but did pretty well. Got nominated pretty much everywhere all season, but not as many opportunities to win, because then we had Oppenheimer, which totally dominated. It swept the major awards, even more so than Everything Everywhere did the previous year, actually. It won the Golden Globe for drama, Critics' Choice Best Picture, SAG Ensemble. Nolan won at DGA. It won BAFTA. It was just like a done deal heading into the Oscars. So, long before Al Pacino confirmed it was his eyes seeing Oppenheimer on that envelope. It was indeed very obvious. So, of course, Oppenheimer is Christopher Nolan's 3-hour epic biopic about J. Robert Oppenheimer, a theoretical physicist who was dubbed the father of the atomic bomb, and it explores his work during the Manhattan Project to develop the bomb, which was ultimately used in Japan. And it also has a parallel story of Lewis Strauss, chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission, and his efforts to cancel Oppenheimer's security clearance in the years that follow. So, yes, a few questions for you here. You don't have to answer everything at once, but let's just start with Oppenheimer doing as well as it did. Why do you think Oppenheimer was our Best Picture winner this year, and what were your thoughts on the film? I believe you were a fan.
Yes, I
Yes.
must say I did feel admittedly very boring all year having this as my number one film of the year. I usually am not intentionally, but not somebody who ends up aligning with Best Picture. Oftentimes, my favorites of the year aren't even nominees. But
Hmm.
this year, it just so happened that everything that Oppenheimer was doing just coalesced into such a wonderful cinematic experience that it just aligned so perfectly with my personal tastes in terms of what I want to see at the movies. So much so that the fact that it became a blockbuster feels like a surprise because, again,
Yeah.
I'm not trying to inflate myself to some sort of intelligentsia, but used to the things that I enjoy in film or in any medium of popular entertainment also being popular. They're just not usually how things work out for me. But this film, I never doubted its chances for Best Picture. I personally had it as my prediction for Best Picture for the majority of 2023 going into 2024, basically since right before it opened, once we got reviews. So from mid-July until whenever the Oscars were, mid-March.
Hmm.
So that's
Wow.
I think it probably is the most obvious Best Picture winner we've had since Return of the King, possibly. Uh, in terms of it was never in doubt the entire year. And
Hmm.
you didn't even see a lot of people trying to raise an argument against it in a way that they may have for something like Nomadland or Everything Everywhere, where people said it could lose. Nobody really thought that. Nobody really thought that, or for the most part, really wanted that, in my opinion. There were obvious
Right.
people who weren't fans. No movie's going to get 100% positive ratings from everybody. But I think for the most part, this was a pretty agreed upon consensus pick for both audiences and clearly for Academy voters.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to speak to that, like Oppenheimer becoming this blockbuster hit is something that I was not expecting at all. I kind of expected it to be kind of in that like Lincoln range where like I knew it would do well, but more in like 175 million kind of deal, you know? But people really, really flocked to it and went back to it again and again, which was just so wild to see for as good as it is. But yeah, for me, I really respect the film a lot, but I don't feel the kind of passion for it that I think a lot of people do, quite frankly. I think it might just be a lack of emotional connection that I have to a lot of Nolan's films that I have struggled with for a while, which is my own deal, I will admit. Um, I get that it's hard to translate like theoretical physics to a general audience, but after a while, for me, it does have a little bit of a deadening effect in terms of the exposition of it all. So there are aspects of it that I just hold it back from being the masterpiece that a lot of people think it is. And I'm not saying those people are wrong and that I'm right, but that was just my experience. I mean, I think the editing is incredibly impressive. Like what Jennifer Lame does there and just like balancing the storylines there and going between different time periods and making all of that flow so seamlessly. It's just remarkable and really just delving into his psychology, really, rather than, have it build up to something in this very traditional linear way. Like it's just very masterfully done. So yeah, and I think the cast is great. Cillian Murphy winning for such a muted performance in Best Actor was very exciting. Robert Downey Jr., I get it because of his reputation. I didn't find him to be super great, to be honest. Emily Blunt, happy she's an Oscar nominee now, sure. But, a little more mixed on the film itself than a lot of people, but still really, really, really respected the craft. And I think the reason that it won was because of just everything aligned perfectly in terms of like, this is from a respected director finally making a film that the Academy deemed important. This is a traditional drama rather than sci-fi. It's about a real person. The craft is undeniable and telling a story that I think a lot of people really resonated with. The idea of like, the atomic bomb and not being able to put the toothpaste back in the tube, so to speak, and grappling with consequences of your actions and just, really reckoning with that sense of responsibility, really. Like it's very heavy stuff, but told in a very accessible way. And it made a lot of money as a biopic for adults. You know, how rare is that? And Nolan was overdue, and it had so many great actors of multiple generations, and not even factoring in the whole Barbenheimer phenomenon of it all, which just made it like a true event in a way that very few films modern outside of superhero stuff really has done.
You know, the thing is, I do think this is kind of the ideal Best Picture winner in terms of, to your point, content and success, and even as a freaking World War II picture. Like,
Yep.
it's everything that they love. And I think even if the film had been to the level of success that people like yourself and myself assumed, you know, that sub 200 million, it would still have probably won Best Picture. But the
Yeah.
fact that it became a literal blockbuster, a 3 hour, really talky movie that's half in black and white, it just became undeniable. It became something that the money wasn't enough of a reward. It needed to be given these awards, and it just swept the season. There was never any doubt. I never had any doubt. I think anybody that ever had any doubts that this was going to win Best Picture was kidding themselves, frankly. It
Yeah.
just was that easy. Sometimes the Oscars is that easy. I know in the past decade it hasn't seemed like it. It seemed like the Oscars are leaning towards surprises, especially last minute ones, but there was never a substantial fight put up against Oppenheimer at any point in the season.
Right. And people who did think that there could be a fight were probably looking for clicks and stories that
What? People
weren't
do
there.
such things? Kevin.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It's like telling you Santa isn't real.
Oh my God.
Sorry, another revelation. Yes. So that is what actually makes it interesting to talk about any plausible runner-up to Oppenheimer, because even with Poor Things getting 4 wins, there were still some people who were like, well, maybe it was still too weird to possibly be a runner-up even. I think those wins clearly to me prove that they really responded to it personally, especially, you know, Best Actress and winning production design, costume design over another plausible contender in Barbie, or makeup and another plausible contender in Maestro. So do you agree that Poor Things was the runner-up? Do you agree with the premise of my initial question?
You know, I think I do, but only for lack of a better option.
That's the
Because
thing. Yeah.
going into the night, I had my predictions ranked, and I believe I had my runner-up potentials were maybe Zone of Interest or even American Fiction, just based on its
Mm.
inevitable screenplay win. And
Hmm.
Zone of Interest, there was talk of it building in buzz right around when the Oscars were happening, and it winning Best Sound kind of surprising, I think does indicate that there was
Yeah.
substantial support for that film. And getting into Best Screenplay was a surprise. But I do think at the end of the day, Poor Things had the voters' attention. I don't always think whatever wins either the second most awards or significant above the line awards is the automatic frontrunner. I think sometimes some films that don't win are just as close. They just don't win. For
Mm.
example, I don't want to start a fight, but I don't think The Father was the runner-up for Nomadland.
Okay.
Even though it won Best Actor in Adapted Screenplay, I see the thinking, but I just think that maybe, and this may be the case here, voters were aligned behind something, but just not with enough fervor or numbers to actually tip it over into the win categories. But for the sake of arguments, I do think Poor Things makes sense as a runner-up. I myself only had it on the night of predicted for 1 Oscar. I only thought it would get production design. I thought costumes would go to Barbie, makeup would go to Maestro, and Lily Gladstone would win actress. So every single win was basically a surprise. And then
Hmm.
looking at those wins, it is the runner-up to Oppenheimer in terms of wins. It does indicate that voters really liked this movie. On the other hand, it is divisive by nature and by intention, and I do think there was a good chance that some voters put it lower down their ballot, some more traditional voters. But as we see, I think those voters are being outnumbered every year with more new voices being brought into the academy. And being younger or international doesn't automatically mean you're going to be more open-minded or into movies like this. But I do think that it shows that movies like this have more of a chance than they ever did before. Something
Yeah.
like Everything Everywhere winning the previous year, which feels similar in like tone and voter appeal to Poor Things,
Yeah.
shows
Or
that this is possible.
divisive. Yeah.
Exactly,
You know,
exactly.
that's not a
Um,
film that you might expect would win a preferential ballot, for example. considering
Sure.
some of the elements of that, hot dog fingers and,
Hot dog fingers, certain weapons used in fights.
sure.
But I I do
Raccacoonie.
think,
Shout out Raccacoonie.
thank God, I was waiting for you to bring him up.
Someone had to.
Someone had to. Something needs to be done. But I do think I agree that Poor Things is in the conversation as a
Yeah.
definite potential runner-up.
A definite potential. I'll take it. Definite potential, maybe, on a good day. Yeah, it's just a matter of looking at the other options and feeling like, Poor Things just like got into pretty much every category that was eligible to be in. And I think maybe this is wrong, but I do think Lanthimos was maybe a runner-up to Nolan, perhaps, just in terms of really that's the kind of film that tends to win in director in terms of craft and performance and visually striking and everything. Maybe it was Jonathan Glazer, I don't know, but hard to say. I just think when I look at the other options, there are more downsides, quite frankly. So, and this kind of like very Odyssey-like story, like even though it is unconventional, it does kind of have a traditional feel to it in terms of just like this is a story of a person and their self-discovery and ending on a pretty happy ending, generally speaking, compared to some of the other films here. So yeah, sort of by default, but it's the kind of thing where it looks more obvious in retrospect rather than it did going into the night that it was Poor Things.
And the thing is, it didn't really matter because I think Oppenheimer probably got somewhere around 60 to 70% of number ones. It just did not matter.
We're talking distant runner-up here.
Exactly. And the thing with Poor Things is it kept surprising me all season, and I'm not alone in that. I didn't think it was going to win the Golden Globe. I thought that would go to Barbie. I didn't think it would get into certain categories at the Oscars. Like, I don't think I had it predicted for director or film editing, or I may have had Dafoe over Ruffalo. Its appeal was constantly underestimated by myself and a lot of other pundits. So maybe that speaks to its best picture chances being greater than I may anticipate.
Well, I think now we should move on a little bit. First of all, I want to integrate some of the questions thematically, not so much just an onslaught at the end.
I appreciate that.
Yes. Just group a few of these, like the Poor Things Oppenheimer questions first before we move on to the other Best Picture nominees that we will touch on very briefly. Let's start with Daniel B. here, who said, is Poor Things one of the more surprising Oscar success stories of the last decade simply due to subject matter?
I would have said yes if it had come out a decade prior, but I think movies like The Shape of Water and Everything Everywhere All at Once succeeding at the Oscars shows that the Academy is, I don't want to say more open-minded because that feels like mission accomplished, but it does feel like they are willing to go along with things that they previously would not have. A woman having an affair with a fish, hot dog fingers. Such things would not have been even conceivable for the Academy to consider for a nomination, even in the 2000s, perhaps. So I think Poor Things is less maybe something that we haven't seen before and more indicative of changing tastes of the Academy.
Yeah. A hint of the future, perhaps.
Perhaps.
Who knows what crazy shit is going to happen in Best Picture nominees going forward. I just think maybe the graphicness of it, the sci-fi of it, sure, it is unusual in that respect, but, there is something to it where the craft is just undeniable and Emma's performance is very accessible for as odd as it is. So it is sort of like The Shape of Water in the sense of like, the subject matter may seem crazy on paper, but the execution of it is like, oh, like I'm surprised by how much I like this movie. Like I can imagine voters saying that upon watching it.
Right. And even if they don't vibe with the general content, there's individual elements to appreciate for like almost each branch of the Academy. There's Emma Stone's performance, which what actor is going to look at that and not go, oh my God, I wish I could have a role like that or deliver something like that. Or there's the craft elements, the costumes are incredible, the sets are wild. So there's aspects for each individual lane of Oscar voter to go, maybe I didn't like the story, but look at the sets.
Exactly. Yep. Christoph said, how great is it that there is finally a Best Picture nominee with Hannah Shaigola in the cast who low-key steals the movie, or at least her scenes? Shouldn't it inspire all of us to watch The Marriage of Maria Braun if we have never seen it before? Yes, this is an inside joke with me and Christoph, who has been pestering me to watch The Marriage of Maria Braun,
Okay,
starring
thank
Anna
God, because I haven't
Shagoda.
seen
Yes.
it.
And he will not be pleased to know that I still have not watched it. But I will say, watching Poor Things again, she was definitely one of my favorite parts. And it actually does make me want to maybe throw it on.
Yeah, it's not to sound like every film lover out there, but it's on my list.
It's on your list, the
Yeah.
ever expanding phantom list.
Yes, that did just make me feel like I forgot to turn in my homework, so thanks for that.
The panic in your eyes.
hmm
Okay, Christoph again said, is Oppenheimer a good film to give Christopher Nolan Oscars for Best Picture or Best Director, or is there a previous film for which you think he would have deserved those honors more?
My favorite, it's really tough because for a long time I would say, kind of with an air of excited contrarianism, that my favorite Nolan was Interstellar.
Yeah,
I do think Oppenheimer may have supplanted it, but I don't. And at the same time, I don't know if I would say that Interstellar is kind of the peak of what Christopher Nolan is going for as a filmmaker, even if it resonates more with me. Oppenheimer does feel like the rare occasion where the director is winning for kind of the ideal film, whether that's because it's the most appealing to Oscar voters or because it does really encompass what he's going for philosophically and dogmatically as a filmmaker. It's about the effects of time compounding on itself, and it's hyper intelligent, and it's really talky, and it is also really visually exciting, but in specific areas that the Academy will align with. And I don't think that was done intentionally. I don't think Christopher Nolan, I don't think he doesn't care about having an Oscar, but I don't think he was making a movie going, this is going to get me my Oscar. But you look at all those things on paper and you go, well, of course the Academy is going to go for this.
yes. I think Oppenheimer makes complete sense as his Oscar win in both picture and director.
Totally.
Do I prefer perhaps a few others in his filmography? Perhaps, actually, Interstellar is one of them. Maybe Dunkirk on a good day. I'm not sure. But yeah, I think just to speak to the question, like, of course, this is the film that he gets his Oscar for.
Right.
No,
It's also
no question.
very funny to me that the two Best Director nominations he has are for World War II movies. Now they're doing wildly different things than, say Mr. Roberts. I don't know why that was the
Wow. What a pull.
but I don't know. That's World War
Shout
II,
out
right?
Mr. Roberts.
Thanks, Jack Lemmon. But it is still, at the end of the day, a movie about, ostensibly good triumphing over evil, if you want to say that. But, there's much more complicated layers to it with Oppenheimer,
Sure.
which really, I think, makes it like a World War II movie for the like postmodern era we're currently in.
Yeah.
So about the ideal picture you could hope for to really lean into Oscar voters' predilections.
Yeah, exactly. Dan B said, do you think that Oppenheimer would have still won had there not been the Barbenheimer hype?
I do. I do really
too.
think that because, like I said, I think if it still makes a good amount of money, which it was always going to, because this is a Christopher Nolan movie, it was being positioned in summer. It definitely had at least the buzz of like, you gotta see it in theaters. And that was all true regardless of Barbie. Do I think Barbie helped at least double, if not more, its box office intake and make it therefore kind of undeniable for Oscars? I really, really do. But I do think Barbenheimer or not, Oppenheimer was always going to win. And to speak to that point, like I said, we all had it in our predictions as number one before Barbenheimer really solidified.
Yeah, before it was even released, I remember having it at number one.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
yeah. I think if anything, Barbenheimer just made it more of a blowout, honestly, for Oppenheimer. Sean said, with Everything Everywhere and Oppenheimer, do you think box office success is becoming a more valuable post-COVID Oscar asset?
I think it helps. I think it makes things feel more solidified or undeniable because you can't point to it as a disappointment in a way that you could something like, say, Spielberg's West Side Story, which had strong buzz going into that Oscar year, but then the box office kind of became its Achilles heel and everything else was just making up for it. And looking at the Oscar lineup from this year, everything was either a box office hit or was never going to be one because of like streaming or just its subject matter. Something like The Zone of Interest was never going to be a blockbuster, but it still made, I'm looking now, $52 million is fantastic.
It's
And then
incredible.
all sorts of other stuff like, right, exactly. Barbie was a big hit, obviously. Killers of the Flower Moon did really well. Poor Things did well. So I think it becomes kind of the thing to crystallize its ability or crystallize its chances to get into Best Picture. There's no flops here. Let's say that.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I think when you extend it out even to like Green Book or Parasite, maybe not Nomadland, but certainly even like Coda, there also has to be a certain entertainment value when it comes to Best Picture, I think, these days that make people inspired and want to vote for it and be on their team, quote unquote. So I think it's not just box office success. It has to be like giving you that galvanizing feeling at the same time.
Right. I mean, everybody
Just a
likes
thought.
to vote for a winner.
Yeah.
The underdog isn't the same as loser. People want to
Yeah.
vote for a winner.
Mm-hmm. Fun question here. Adam said, should Al Pacino be brought on to news networks to announce election results the way he announced Best Picture,
Oh my
aka
God.
My Eyes See Kamala?
Anything that gets me to laugh and feel joy regarding elections, sure, why not?
Mm-hmm. But he also says, or maybe a De Niro at the Tonys flavor instead.
That works even more for me. I
Yeah.
love that.
I say have them both on standby on election night.
Let them fight.
Yep. Andrew Carden said, rank the films that won Best Picture, Director, Actor, and Supporting Actor. Going my way, The Best Years of Our Lives, Ben-Hur, Oppenheimer.
This is really easy for me. It's
Me too.
Oppenheimer #1, and then Best Years of Our Lives, Ben-Hur, and then Going My Way, which I cannot stand. One of my least favorite Best Picture winners.
More like Go Away.
Okay, yeah.
Yep, thank you. I would swap Best Years of Our Lives and Oppenheimer, but yes, absolutely, Ben-Hur 3.
Figured you
Going
would.
my way. Yes.
Ben-Hur being a double Oppenheimer, sorry, Ben-Hur being a two-time acting winner feels odd. I know it is, but it
Very
doesn't
strange. Yeah.
doesn't sit like that in my brain.
No. Jeffrey Kerr said, Emily Blunt finally became an Oscar nominee this year thanks to Oppenheimer. Which actors overdue for their first nomination would you most like to see get one next?
So I did look into this question beforehand because I wanted to have a good answer. And the thing is, we are doing a really good job lately of getting a lot of actors who have been on lists of most overdue into the Academy in terms of getting nominations. People like Michelle Yeoh, Jamie Lee Curtis, Colin Farrell, Kirsten Dunst. We're really checking off a lot of boxes. So this question was harder than I thought it would be. There's a ton of international actors that I may be less familiar with who would be, I'm sure, would be very worthy contenders. But the short list I made was, for some reason, my #1 is Daniel Craig, who's an actor I've loved for a long time. He's one of my favorite working male actors, and he has a really good chance of potentially getting in this year with Queer. Robert Pattinson, we had Kristen Stewart as Oscar nominee already. Some of our veterans who weirdly never got an Oscar, and I worry about their chances at this point. John Goodman and Mia Farrow are two that stick out. Also, I'm just a huge fan of her, and I think she should have maybe won for Crash. Thandaway Newton, I think, is a really exciting actor. I'm always excited to see her on screen. And Demi Moore and Zoe Saldana have also good chances of possibly getting in this year, and I would be really excited to see them finally have an Oscar nomination.
Yes, for sure. Pattinson made my list, I will say, as well. Oscar Isaac, I think, it could happen for him, big one for me would be Paul Dano, who has had multiple chances, but has not gotten in.
Love and Mercy should have been his chance easily. I mean, that supporting actor year was not great. There was definitely room for him.
Yeah, but I mean, even part of big Best Picture nominees like There Will Be Blood or The Fabelmans, and it just didn't happen.
Yep.
Maybe I don't know why I thought of this, but one of the Fanning sisters, Elle or Dakota, honestly, listen, they've been putting in the work,
I mean, Dakota wasn't not in contention 23 years ago for I Am Sam.
That's true. Yeah. And she just got her first Emmy nomination for Ripley. So good for you, Dakota. I also thought of Catherine O'Hara, who is just another one of those that's
Where was the for your consideration campaign?
I'm telling you.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I didn't get nominated. Just the line
Always she
delivery
wrestles
alone.
inside me. Yeah.
Yes. So that's all we got for those kind of questions. We can move on to some of these other Best Picture nominees and
All right.
break down our thoughts. Not as extensive as Poor Things necessarily, but just a few little brief thoughts. So Killers of the Flower Moon. Let us start there, which got 10 nominations. So beyond Best Picture, just to recap for people, it was nominated for Best Director for Martin Scorsese, Best Actress for Lily Gladstone, Supporting Actor for Robert De Niro, Cinematography, Costume Design, Film Editing, Production Design, Original Score, and Original Song for Wajaje, and it won nothing.
Yep.
I truly cannot believe this happened yet again for Martin Scorsese of getting 10 Oscar nominations and walking away with nothing for the third time after Gangs of New York and The Irishman. Someone has to look into this.
It's ridiculous. I was so sure that this would not be the case this year, and most of us felt similarly.
Mm-hmm.
But oh well.
But yes, Killers of the Flower Moon is based on the David Gann book about the real-life genocide of Native Americans in Osage Nation in the 1920s in Oklahoma. And it's about the process of white men systematically marrying Osage women for their head rights and then having them murdered to reap the benefits. And we focus on Ernest Burkhart, played by Leonardo DiCaprio, and his relationship with his wife Molly, Lily Gladstone, and how Molly's entire family and almost all of her community are targeted by the white men, and the subsequent investigation by the FBI into this series of murders. So we got a Martin Scorsese epic here. Thoughts on Killers of the Flower Moon?
Killers of the Flower Moon is a movie that and this happens almost every Oscar year, a movie that I respect more than I feel passion or enjoyment for. But I think that is maybe not intentional, but required
kind of the point
for this subject matter. Exactly. I mean, you don't go to a funeral and go, I had a great time, or why didn't I have a good time? It's just not the purpose of that thing.
Right.
I think what the film does best is kind of sit in that guilt and never give you a relief. Sometimes there's nothing you can do with tragedy but mourn. There's not always a lesson to be learned or justice to be found. Sometimes it just happened and you just need to put it in amber and look at it, almost like a museum piece.
Yeah.
Which is some of the critiques I saw, is that it does kind of just put it on the screen and not really do much with it. But I think that's a feature, not a bug. And there's so many individual elements of this that are so just beyond admirable. It's a Scorsese film, so it's going to be well directed. He's loving these long run times, and I think that is necessary for you to feel the repetitive churning of this machine of murder to the point where it almost becomes like the weather, sun up, murder, sun goes down. And you don't get to that level of banality without length or without sitting in it for a long time. I think some of these performances are just some of the best of their actor's career. Personally, if I had a ballot, I would have voted for De Niro. I think it's some of his best work this century, possibly. I think it's maybe my favorite Leo performance, which is saying something. Just really exceptional work. And I always love a movie that's going to point the camera at evildoers and not kind of weirdly praise them for their cunning. These are idiots. Like, these are stupid people that just because of how they were born have a level of ability to execute evil deeds. And I think that's sometimes all that it boils down to. Not all wrongdoing on a mass scale is done from an evil genius. Sometimes evil is stupid. Most times, actually. And I think the film doesn't, like all things it's covering, doesn't underline that too explicitly, but I think that's to its benefit. I think the film puts it out there for you to examine as a person. The movie wants you to come to it rather than it bringing itself to you.
Yeah, very well said. Yeah, personally, I mean, I was very moved by the film and what it was trying to say in the end, especially. I do understand some of the criticisms of some people felt like it focused too much on the white men compared to Molly and her specific struggles, but I think the storytelling is so rich. Like, I read the book before I got to see the film, which is also really very gripping read, I must say. And I appreciate the changes that were made actually there to center it less on the FBI portion of it and just having the audience really just sit with the atrocities of these murders and just have it be this sort of, elegiac sort of tribute to her strength and the strength of Osage Nation, and show how what happened can't be undone, no matter what kind of atoning takes place after the fact, or even in the form of this film, which is, I think, part of why Scorsese shows up at the end, literally himself. It's just a very sobering film, and I think the Oscars got it right to single out Lily Gladstone, especially, whose performance still sticks with me, and I can't wait to talk about that on the Best Actress series for this year. And also Robert De Niro and how terrifying he is in the kind of double life that William Hale led, with just being this outwardly friendly guy, but also kind of a monster, just plotting the death of an entire nation behind the scenes. So, very powerful film. The ending is really chilling, and, I'm bummed it didn't win anything, because I think it was worthy of winning Best Actress, even supporting actor, like you said, production design, score, like there were options there. But yeah, it feels like just one of those that the industry respected but didn't love, which is a familiar sentiment for Scorsese films, unfortunately. And I understand why. Like, it gets very hopeless in the end.
Sure.
But
yeah.
I wish it did even better, even with the 10 nominations it got.
Yeah, I imagine some viewers probably and Oscar voters probably wanted it to be more instructional, but it doesn't allow
Yeah.
you that relief. It's almost saying like tears are necessary and yet at the same time pointless. There's
Mhm.
nothing to be done about this, and all that can be done is attention can be paid, which is what happened here. The Oscars gave it all the nominations, but didn't ultimately push it over the finish line.
Yeah. Yep. Well, JC asked, without a clear frontrunner for Best Picture this season, if Killers of the Flower Moon was released in 2024, do you think it has a better shot?
It is September. We are in the middle of right now, like a bunch of film festivals where things are being solidified for Best Picture, but he's right. There is no frontrunner at this point. There is not an
Mhm.
Oppenheimer. I will not be looking back a year from now and going, well, I always had that at number one, because I don't feel confident in what I have predicted right now. I do
Yeah.
think if something from Martin Scorsese came out this year, which this year doesn't, unless I'm missing something or forgetting something, have a huge like classical auteur film coming down the pike, then I think it probably has a good chance at least winning a few Oscars as opposed to none.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it would have a better shot of winning things, but I still think there would have been that little bit of resistance to, giving Best Picture to something as bleak as Killers of the Flower Moon. I think it would have maybe ended up like Roma or The Power of the Dog, where like maybe Scorsese even wins director, but Best Picture is like not so much.
It's funny because Oppenheimer is not optimistic. It is
Yeah.
similarly ends on a defeatist note, but I think the filmmaking is more invigorating as opposed to Killers, where the filmmaking
Yes.
is impressive, but I don't want to say restrained. That doesn't feel like the right word, but it isn't as apparent.
Yeah, true. Kareem Balak said, why do you think it is that Scorsese has now had multiple films having nominations of 10 or more without winning at least one Oscar?
I can't speak to Gangs of New York because I was there, but I wasn't in the Oscar race. I was 10. But I do think that speaking to The Irishman and Killers, they both are, first of all, really long. That's always going to be a detriment to some. And I think they both end on a similar note of kind of shrugging, what can you do? Which is, again, the point. Sometimes that's all you can do is look at something and hope to learn from it. But I do think that does mean it's hard for voters to kind of want to award it because it leaves you feeling bad. It
Yeah,
doesn't
you
make you
don't want to feel
feeling
bad.
anything but just kind of gross, which is the point.
Yep. Yep. I mean, I just think there is a base level of respect where no matter what he does, it is going to be at least like a good to great movie with fantastic craft. But maybe there is a feeling that like we could sort of rely on Marty, but maybe he hasn't met the kind of crowd pleasing entertainment of Goodfellas very much
Sure.
lately.
Yeah.
A lot of his recent films are very, very somber in tone, but it is weird that it just keeps happening. Like you would think it would just by like odds, one of these films would win something. So just weird luck too, I think maybe. Ian Balaklock said, Killers of the Flower Moon is Scorsese's second Best Picture nominee in a row to get 0 Oscar wins. Would you blame the long runtime or something else for its lack of success? So you kind of said that's part of it too, right?
Yeah, it does not help for sure. If you're not bought into what the film's doing, having it be almost 4 hours is not gonna help your case.
Yeah. Well, Oppenheimer is 3 hours. So
that's the thing is all season people were going, oh my God, Killers of the Flower Moon is so long. It can never win. It's only a few minutes longer than Oppenheimer.
Yes. Interesting picking and choosing there. But look, quite a few Best Picture winners are lengthy, as I know, having watched all of them. So.
Right. And as one of the co-stars of Oppenheimer once said, time is relative. And Oppenheimer does feel more propulsive and energetic. It's got that score going the whole time. We're jumping around editing-wise. Killers intentionally makes you sit in what you're watching and you feel the time pass.
Yeah, exactly. Christoph said, rank the 3 Scorsese films that each got 10 nominations but 0 wins. He asked a few questions there. So just to start with that, did you have a clear ranking between the 3?
Me having a list or ranking? What? Yeah, I do.
Sorry,
I got that. I got that ready to go.
Stupid question.
Yeah. For me, it's really obvious. Irishman, Killers, both movies I love. And then Gangs of New York, which is a movie I don't like, but I haven't seen it in a decade. So
yeah,
it may be better than I remember. But I remember feeling really... I felt the critiques that people had for Killers, for Gangs of New York, like a certain "we get it, girl, we get it" at a certain point.
Yeah, I have the same ranking, so nothing to add there.
All right.
And then he also asks if you could give each of them 1 Oscar, what would they be?
So Gangs of New York, I will admit, has amazing art direction. Now that means I'm taking an Oscar away from one of the greatest films of all time, but
Chicago. Yeah,
but it is impressively structured, so I wouldn't be too sad about that. If we're talking actual nominations, Irishman, I would be okay with Pacino winning. I was really a fan of that performance. But if we're talking in general, I'm still can't believe that De Niro was not a factor at all that entire season. I think it's some of his greatest work. And then for Killers, I would have been totally fine with, again, De Niro or Lily Gladstone winning. They would have both gotten my vote.
Yeah. I think for Gangs, that's tough because I don't know if I would actually reward it anything, to be honest.
Exactly.
But yeah, I'll do production or art direction, is what it was called at the time. That feels right. And Chicago could still have its 5 other Oscars. Like, that's fine.
She'll be fine.
Yes. The Irishman, I would actually do Joe Pesci, personally. I really, really love that performance. And Killers, for sure, Lily Gladstone.
Yeah.
So, yeah. It's tough.
She'll be back.
Yeah, I hope so.
I think so.
Okay, good. I just, I get a very cynical when it comes to any non-white actor.
I understand.
In terms of getting multiple nominations. So
maybe I'm manifesting. This is the secret.
Yes, I love that. Okay. Well, let's do another difficult film while we're still in the picture director discussion here. Let's do The Zone of Interest. Okay.
All right.
So, yes. Okay. So beyond Best Picture, Zone of Interest nominated for director for Jonathan Glazer, adapted screenplay, and it won 2 other Oscars, Best International Feature Film and Best Sound. This is a heavy one. This is based somewhat loosely on the novel by Martin Amis, and it's set during World War II at the house of Rudolf Haas, a Nazi commandant, living with his wife and kids next to the Auschwitz concentration camp. And we see him eager to be promoted, while his wife lives pretty happily, kind of attending to her tasks at home and the garden. And meanwhile, we frequently hear the horrors of what's happening next door at the camp, screaming and burning bodies and other horrific sounds. And it creates a very chilling effect and shows the kind of cruelty that humanity is capable of. So not an easy watch, but it's definitely a theater-going experience that I certainly haven't forgotten personally. But what were your thoughts on The Zone of Interest?
The Zone of Interest blew me away. If it wasn't for Oppenheimer, this would be my clear pick for Best Picture. I thought this was a just monumental achievement in terms of filmmaking, supporting thematic storytelling. This is really less about the narrative and more about how it's told, which for a visual medium makes a lot of sense. It's funny because I don't want to say I agree with this, but a lot of people understandably kind of go, what more is there to explore with World War II when it comes to art, especially film? There are so many movies about World War II, especially ones that the Oscars appeal to. I wouldn't, or that appeal to the Oscars. I wouldn't be surprised if it is the most common like through line subject for the most Best Picture nominees. In 1998, we had what, three movies alone that were about World War II.
Yes.
It's just something that gets explored a lot in popular entertainment. But what I think this film does is almost examine that on a metatextual level, maybe not even intentionally, but I think it really mires you in the setting. And this is a film that is almost an exercise in futility. Because what more can you say about the Holocaust? What is there to be learned from or to explore? At this point, I would say probably not much more than we already have, but the thing about it is that it must be continually examined and brought to the forefront of consciousness so that it's not repeated.
Yeah.
Obviously, make it that way you will. We all heard Jonathan Glazer's Oscar speech, and I think there are obvious parallels to be drawn to current events happening in the world. And I think this film shows the necessity of looking back and not feeling glib or tired of examinations of the same subjects over and over again, because even if there isn't always something to learn or at least something new, there is value and necessity in keeping it front of mind. Similar to Killers of the Flower Moon, there's nothing to be learned from this tragedy besides the fact that it happened. And you see that in the end of the film where it flashes forward to Auschwitz in the present day, which is one of the most startling jumps I've seen in a film in my recent memory. And the film doesn't really explore or explain exactly what it's going for there. So it really is up to interpretation, which I really credit Jonathan Glazer with, because that's brave for a filmmaker to do with a subject as tricky as, a genocide. But I think what the film is going for is this idea that if you're not careful in how you examine or present history, it can be misinterpreted and it can be used for evil. There's a framing to look at with Auschwitz where it could be viewed as, if you're looking at it from the perspective of the main character, he could be looking at these piles of shoes and the dusting of the extermination chambers as a way to memorialize his achievements, as he would put it. So it really is about perspective, and historical perspective is so important. And this film doesn't really give you perspective besides presenting it objectively, which is both brave and powerful at the same time. This film really blew me away. If you haven't picked up on that yet,
Yeah.
there's just so much to explore here, and I think it's a film that maybe more than any other movie in this lineup we're going to keep referring to and coming back to.
Yes. Honestly, of all the films nominated this year, this was the crowning achievement. Honestly, I think this is one of those films where, as the credits rolled, I realized I had never quite seen anything like it or experienced anything like it, because it's such an oral experience, especially in the theater, having the sound all around you. It's so horrifying. And I also did walk away feeling like this is a film that is going to be studied and taught for decades and remembered for the effectiveness of really just immersing you in this very banal tasks of this family's life while this full-on genocide is happening right next door. And it's not like they have a mental block there necessarily. Like, they fully believe in what's happening and are glad that it's happening, for as disgusting as it is. So, it's not necessarily about the banality of evil, which I think a lot of people kind of said about it. For me, it's just about the mental gymnastics and the conditioning and the things that you convince yourself of to justify true evil. And to me, it's almost a miracle that the Academy even nominated it, because this has to be one of the bleakest, just most rotten to the core, but intentionally so, films that has ever been nominated for Best Picture. And I was so beyond thrilled when it won the Oscar for Best Sound because it's so integral to why the film works as well as it does. And yeah, I'm glad that Jonathan Glazer took the time in his acceptance speech for international feature to call out the atrocities in Gaza and the dehumanization happening. I think it took a lot of courage in calling out how the terror there, cost the lives of people on both sides, but especially the Palestinians kind of caught in the crossfire. And I think based on the backlash that he received after that and how his quote was mischaracterized, it only kind of proved his point, to me at least, about the selective outrage, I think, going on when it comes to not only this conflict, but a lot of issues that affect people's lives.
Right. And the Oscar winning sound design, I think, thematically shows that it is so easy to get used to the worst shit. It is so easy that even this is not a long movie compared to the ones we've already talked about. Less than an hour into it, you get so attuned and accustomed to the roiling, boiling, constant churning sound of the incinerators that you barely even hear it anymore, and you don't notice it until it's suddenly gone when the film goes to a different location. That in itself proves the point of the film. That shows how easy it is to just get used to anything. And again, Jonathan Glazer's Oscar speech being mischaracterized and interpreted in such bad faith as it was shows that. And even, it's about as congenial a call for peace for a controversial topic, if you want to call it controversial, can be, and it's still, resulted in him being, I'm sure people will, not watch his films forever now because of that speech, certain people. And yeah, I mean, it's just, it admires you in the setting so deeply that unlike other Holocaust or World War II films, you don't feel the inevitable triumphant forces on the horizon. It really feels like there's no end in sight. And the fact that this death camp is already so established and they're planning and getting excited for what they can do in the future, it's hopeless. It's just awful. But at the same time, you cannot look away. It is so meticulously crafted. It's like watching the world's greatest produced snuff film. You cannot look away. It is just really a monumental achievement.
Yeah, and all the camera work very strategically placed throughout the house so that there was a lot of freedom for the actors to move about and whatnot. It's just very meticulous, and there is no catharsis at the end. It just kind of leaves you in that space. So it's a tough watch, but such an incredible achievement. And I think we only got one question about this, but yeah, Jonathan Edwards said, if The Zone of Interest made Sandra Hüller a double nominee, do you think she would have won supporting as a consolation for not winning lead a la Jessica Lange?
I don't think that. I did think she was going to get nominated. I believe I had it predicted. But I don't think the Oscars are really interested in going, oh, you got 2 nominations, so you have to win one. What I think we see more often lately is actors get nominated once for a year's achievement, whether that's, and then win for their year's achievement, whether that's Laura Dern for Marriage Story and Little Women, or Alicia Vikander for Ex Machina and The Danish Girl. We've seen recent happenstances of double nominees, not as frequently as we used to, although it's uncommon, whatever.
Scarlett Johansson was most recent. Yeah,
Scarlett Johansson didn't win both. Julianne Moore in 2002 didn't win both. It doesn't feel like when they get 2 nominations, the Oscars feel like they need to reward one of those with a win. It almost feels like you got 2 nominations. Congratulations. That's all you're getting.
Right. That's the end. Right. And also, I don't think anyone was beating Da'Vine Joy Randolph for the holdovers. She just swept everything. And, I don't think even a surprising supporting nomination for Sandra would have been enough. I do think she could have been a plausible runner-up, maybe, to Da'Vine, because that race was extremely weak outside of her, quite frankly. So, could have happened. But
yeah, I thought at a certain point that maybe Emily Blunt might put up more of a fight, but once she lost the Globe, it was Randolph all the way.
Yep. Well, let's finish off the picture director connection and seamlessly transfer from Sandra Hüller and talk about Anatomy of a Fall. Beyond Best Picture, Anatomy of a Fall was nominated for Director for Justine Triet, Best Actress for Sandra Hüller, Film Editing, and it wins for Original Screenplay for Justine Triet and her partner Arthur Harari. So, Anatomy of a Fall, French film, but one of the interesting narratives this season was the fact that France did not pick it as their international feature submission. Ultimately a mistake because the film they opted to go for, The Taste of Things, was not even nominated. But Anatomy of a Fall is about a mostly English-speaking German woman named Sandra, played by Sandra Hüller, living in France with her husband, who is ultimately suspected of murdering him after an incident where he falls out the window of their house to his death, or was he pushed? Who knows? And she goes about trying to defend her innocence while her young son also kind of complicates things. This is one I really liked a lot. A lot of people really liked it. It won the Palme d'Or at Cannes, so had a lot of expectations for those of us who saw it after that festival. So how did it land for you?
The thing about Anatomy of a Fall is that based on the description, it's, fancy European film festival origins, even its very clinical title, it doesn't feel like it would be such an entertaining film, but it is. It is so
Yeah.
enjoyable to watch. It is so clever. The screenplay is just so enjoyable to listen to. There's that constantly retweeted video of Sandra Hüller's monologue that's used as evidence in the film. Just really, I don't want to use the word fun, but it is an enjoyable watch. It is not as dissective or, again, clinical as you might think it would be based on the subject matter. And Sandra Hüller is just extraordinary in this movie. She's an actress that I don't want to say admired for a long time because I don't think I noticed her before Tony Erdmann, but she just blew me away with this performance.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this a lot. It's very riveting, and it's 2.5 hours too, I think, but it just flies by for me. And her performance is incredible. Another one I can't wait to break down on the Best Actress series. And yeah, I mean, what an incredible year between this and The Zone of Interest, and such wildly different characters. Like, I cannot wait to see where she goes from here. Yeah, I love the pacing of the film, especially in the way it kind of doles out information at its own sort of rhythm, its own pace, and really keeps you paying attention and invested and, coming to your own conclusions, which is always fun, I think, as a viewer. And it also does so without it feeling like it's sort of begging for like an audience participation, if that makes sense. Like, it just feels very natural and so detailed, and I don't know, sort of like, oddly enough, sort of like Tar the previous year, where you just find yourself really compelled by the storytelling and the rhythms of it and the confidence of it. So I loved it. I'll talk a lot more about it on the actress series, but that argument scene that you mentioned between her and her husband is one of the best back and forths I've seen in quite some time. And yeah, I love the ending. Like, it's just such confident storytelling, and excited to see what Justine Triet does next as well. And I also remember, like, just to talk about its Best Picture chances, I remember a lot of actors and people in the industry talking about how much they loved Anatomy of a Fall. So I would be willing to bet it did pretty well on the preferential ballot, enough to be even like top 3 or 4, maybe.
I agree. I mean, I do think it's up there in terms of Best Picture potentials. It won Best Screenplay, and we know that Best Screenplay is arguably the most important race when it comes to Best Picture chances.
Yep. Well, Global Film Paul said, if France had submitted Anatomy of a Fall, which film would have won Best International Feature Film?
This is tough. I do think it probably would have been Anatomy of a Fall. I think it is a more generally appealing film. Zone of Interest, 2 Oscar wins, it was always going to win international feature the second that A, France chose not to submit it, and B, it got that Best Picture win or nomination. That was never not going to happen, just by nature of it being the most seen, if nothing else. And I think that sound win is isolated enough from what the film is doing thematically and narratively that it can be appreciated regardless of what else you think of the film. Anatomy of a Fall's screenplay win, though, shows that the voters really appreciated the film's substance. And I think that is the exact thing that appeals most to voters, like the entertaining quality of it and the cleverness of it. It lets you also feel smart as an audience member because you're following along with this very intelligent screenplay that's written with, it's in a bunch of different languages and it covers really extensive topics and it's very talky, but it's never uh, lofty, but it makes you feel smart for watching it and enjoying it. So I do think just based on wider appeal, it probably would have triumphed in international if they made the right choice in picking it.
Yeah, I agree with all of those reasons. I think it's just more conventional too than compared to Zone of Interest and easier for a widespread academy to embrace. But I think it would have been exciting. Like, I don't think it would have been a done deal like it is pretty much every single year at this point in international film ever since Roma. It feels like every
Yeah.
single year it's like the very obvious blowout frontrunner wins every time. At least we would have had a compelling race, you know?
Well, since Roma, it's always been either a Best Picture and or Best Director nominee, which just kind of makes
Exactly.
it
Yeah.
obvious, super, super obvious.
And that's why, like, these two films got both of those things, so it would have been fun to watch. But France did their French thing there.
They love to do that. They're not
They do.
good lately at that.
They're flopping, low key. So
Anyway.
something needs to be done. Yeah. Hostile takeover of whoever's deciding these things.
Literally, though.
Yeah. Yeah. Christoph said, with 2 Best Picture nominees in 1 year under her belt, where do you expect Sandra Hüller's career to go from here?
I really think that's up to her because I think, if she wants to make the leap to being in more widely seen English language film, she absolutely can do that with the pull she has right now in the industry. I do worry, though, that she would probably get relegated to kind of supporting roles, in the way that we see often international actors do. So I wouldn't blame her if she wanted to kind of stay in her lane and just be really successful at what she was already doing well.
Yes, it could go either way, like you said. She has already signed up for multiple Hollywood films, though.
Fantastic.
Or I guess English language films like Project Hail Mary. She's in the new Iñárritu film coming.
Okay.
Well,
who
so
isn't? I'm in that movie.
that's right. Okay, well, congratulations, or I'm
Thanks so
sorry, depending on how the conditions are. Yes, and she's also, I think, in a new film with the May December screenwriter Sammy Birch.
Oh,
So,
okay.
I mean, I could definitely see her being that, like you said, supporting, character actress standout in a lot of films like that. Maybe not as many lead roles, but certainly if, she could definitely go back to Germany and make a lot of leading roles as she has for several years already. So I don't know how much her career, like it really is, like you said, dependent on what she wants to do because there's so many different avenues.
Right. I mean, she already kind of did the thing that actors here in America want to do, which is get nominated for an Oscar and be the lead of a successful film. And she did it by following her already established career instincts. So she probably doesn't need to change much to continue to be successful.
Nothing to prove.
Exactly.
Moving forward. Okay, so those were the picture director nominees. A fun, not fun, but just
fun.
Really...
What do you mean? I had a great time.
Okay,
Quick,
fun
breezy.
discussion. Yeah. Well, I'll say a very good group overall of directing
I would agree with
nominees. So let's move on to the other 5 Best Picture nominees that were not in director, starting with the big one, which is Barbie. So beyond Best Picture, Barbie was nominated for Supporting Actor for Ryan Gosling, Supporting Actress for America Ferrera, Adapted Screenplay, Costume Design, Production Design, Original Song for I'm Just Ken, and it won Original Song for What Was I Made For, written by Billie Eilish and Phineas O'Connell, their second Oscar. Wild.
Cool.
Yeah. So this one was obviously a global cinematic event, one that, even with all the positive hype going into it, it was still kind of shocking that the film ended up working as well as it did and satisfying so many audiences, especially with women and girls, and getting 8 Oscar nominations. Like, it was just very wild to see, regardless of what you think of the movie. The fact that it took off as well as it did was just pretty incredible. So Barbie, kind of satirical yet loving tribute to Barbie, the iconic children's doll, with Margot Robbie playing stereotypical Barbie and Ryan Gosling playing stereotypical Ken, who is obsessed with Barbie, even though she doesn't seem to reciprocate those feelings, perhaps. They're living in the Barbie doll world, and Barbie suddenly wakes up one day with feelings of melancholy and realizes she's connected to someone in the real world and goes on a real journey with Ken tagging along as well. So, yeah, this was the other half of our Barbenheimer phenomenon. How do you feel about Barbie and Greta Gerwig's take on it?
So Greta Gerwig is one of my favorite contemporary filmmakers. Lady Bird and Little Women are my favorite films of their respective years. I think
Wow.
she just has a mastery of screenwriting. And the funny thing is, Barbie by default is my least favorite of her efforts
Yeah,
thus far.
sure.
Pretty conclusively, actually. It's not even close. I do
Hmm.
think it is kind of a miraculous achievement in a way that almost got taken for granted, because it never sacrifices Greta Gerwig's uh, the intellect she brings to her properties or the subject matter, the celebration of femininity and the empowerment within that, while also being a movie that opens with the Mattel logo. I don't think the movie ever quite conquers that latter literal mark successfully, nor do I think it should, because just by nature of how it got made, I don't think that's possible. But that doesn't
Right.
mean I don't feel that corporatization, even though it is a movie that is so of its own like creation. It never sacrifices its philosophy in favor of materialism, even if the materialism is there, which is hard for me as somebody who doesn't really like seeing that in their art in general, and as somebody who loves Greta Gerwig and really likes Noah Baumbach's work. Uh, that being said, I cannot imagine a better version of a Barbie movie, which is,
Yeah.
I'm not saying I think one even needs to exist, but if it has to, obviously I'd want it done in this way, which is why by one of our greatest filmmakers, regardless of gender, and with intelligence and never sacrificing that intelligence. And clearly it worked. It was a success in every possible form you could imagine.
Yes, I know. Yeah. I mean, I loved Barbie. I love the experience of seeing Barbie and feeling the excitement from other people in the audience too. Like it was just a very special time. And I'm also such a sucker for Greta Gerwig to begin
Mhm.
with, and her humor, her wavelength. I'm on it. It's very millennial. All the little quirks of Ken's job being just beach, or
Mhm.
like the reference to like the mini series of Pride and Prejudice. It's just like all these specific little things, or the very meta moment with Helen Mirren as the narrator talking about like Margot Robbie and how like maybe she's maybe not the best person to be making the point about women feeling worthless and ugly or whatever. And the entire I'm Just Ken number, like it's such a blast to watch. And I also think what a lot of audiences responded to was just the world building, the fact that they had practical sets and it didn't look like CGI gray sludge, and it just looks really good. You literally want to watch it. And
Exactly.
even
It
if
doesn't
this is
repel your
maybe
eyes.
exactly, and even if this is also my least favorite Greta Gerwig film to date, it still has those moments of really cutting right through me, like those first two films, like even in the What Was I Made For montage, where it just really knocked me for a loop just how emotional I was in that moment. So I really liked it. I think the outrage over Greta's snub in director was something that really kind of went out of control after a while and made it into a gendered thing, where people just kind of ignored the fact that Justine Triet was right there.
Yeah.
um, so interesting, selective like cognitive dissonance there, but it was just a lot. And I think the snub there was more due to the fact that the Academy doesn't really respect comedy directing all that much. So yeah, I don't know if you had any thoughts on the discourse there.
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, I don't want to say like they nominated a woman, so any discussion of sexism in the Academy
Yeah,
is out the window. But on the other hand, there was a lot of bad faith arguments that were just fully ignoring Justine Triet's nomination. And also, to people like us, I don't think anybody was surprised that Greta Gerwig missed. I mean, maybe like
yeah,
surprised in the sense that it was on the table, but I wasn't predicting her at that point in the race, just
me neither.
based more on, to your points, Academy's taste. This is a comedy. It is a comedy first and foremost. And to me,
Broad
that's the
comedy.
film's
Yeah.
exactly. That's the film's greatest achievement is that it is really funny. It's a
Hmm.
funny movie. It like nails the jokes. And that makes the what was I made for montage, which on paper could have been disastrous, so much more of an achievement. Uh, do I think Greta Gerwig should have gotten nominated? I personally don't. Would I have liked to have seen that again, as she's one of my favorite filmmakers? Of course, I do think she was. I think her bigger snub was for Little Women, if you ask me.
Me too.
And
Yeah.
I'm so glad she was nominated for Lady Bird. I would have given her the win that year. So this just makes me more excited for what she has on the horizon because she truly keeps leveling up with each film. And so I'm just excited to see what will be her next nomination because at the end of the day she's going to get nominated again. She's going to win an Oscar one day. It's going to happen. I know that's we don't like to deal in absolutes when it comes to predicting, but you're making a face. I know. But I'm maybe this is my manifestation for this category is Greta Gerwig will one day win her Oscar. I think it's going to happen.
I love
I know
this.
you
I
at home
love this energy.
listening at home agree with me. It's going to happen.
Yeah, I love the energy. Lily Gladstone's going to get nominated again. Greta Gerwig's going to win an Oscar. I have been burned many times by the Academy, so I don't know if I have that
I
optimism, but
understand you're living in the
I
context of
appreciate
all
it.
that came before, but I
Yeah,
think with how we look at the Academy moving forward and our changing expectations of the voters, it does feel
yeah,
like something that is on their proverbial vision board is Greta
I
Gerwig
think
Oscar
so.
winner one day.
Yeah. And also, people feel bad for Greta Gerwig for not getting those nominations. She was still nominated for screenplay. All three of her films she's made have been nominated for Best Picture. So, like, and
Amazing.
she grossed like $1 billion at the box office. Like, her life is fine. It's
Right, that's
okay.
the thing is like Barbie being in the Oscar conversation at all is an achievement.
Yeah,
It's the
exactly.
fact that it became inevitable was what was really amazing. So much so to the point
Hmm.
that people were like, 8 nominations is not enough, which again, it's the Barbie movie. That's amazing.
Yeah, I know. Exactly. All right. Well, Rob Barlow says it felt like Barbie and Oppenheimer would battle for Best Picture, but not having Best Director or Best Actress knocked that storyline out of the race. If Greta and Margot had gotten in, would there have been more of a battle, and was there some sexism involved in their misses?
It did feel like for a little bit it would just kind of be Barbenheimer all year, all the way up to the Oscars. So much so that I, like many others, thought the two Globe winners would be Barbie and Oppenheimer, and that did not end up being
Yeah.
the case, which I think was the first indication that Barbie was not going to have as easy a road to a win as we thought, and it ended up
Hmm.
winning less Oscars than I thought. Even one Oscar is what most films would dream of, but I thought it would win another one or two on top of that in the design categories, perhaps.
Hmm.
But again, I don't think Gerwig not being here is only because of sexism, nor do I think there being one woman in the category means that there was not sexism at all. So it's
Sure.
tricky. It's a tricky conversation
Yeah.
when it does feel like men can get in much easier for I don't want to this is subjective, but less achievements, lesser
Yeah.
achievements.
No, it's true.
Um, again, I do think her snub for Little Women is a little bit more surprising given the content of that film and the vision of it. It is so heavily directed in its perspective,
Hmm.
whereas Barbie is a comedy. It is an outright comedy. There are you could call Poor Things a comedy. It's still a comedy with like elevated themes and a veneer of awardability. That's not a word, but the other four
It
nominees
is now.
are less comedic. So that's just not something
Right.
that the director's branch, which I would still say is the snobbiest branch, really leans towards, even with the current Academy.
Exactly. Yeah. I think there may have been some resistance from men in the Academy who perhaps couldn't get over the hurdle of voting for a Barbie movie. I'm sure there were some there, so I think that's not a factor. But yeah, like we were saying, it's the fact when you look at what the movie Barbie is, it is very commercial leaning and very comedy forward, and there just aren't that many broad comedies that get respect from the Academy in categories like director or even actress, quite frankly. Like supporting is much easier because it's just more expected there for some reason to have those like comedic scene stealer
Hmm.
kind of things. So,
It's easier to take comedy for the Academy in smaller bites for some reason.
yeah. exactly. Rob Montoya said Greta Gerwig had the chance to be the second female director to be nominated twice for Best Director. Why do you think the Academy has a hard time nominating female directors twice? As of today, Jane Campion is the only one.
I mean, they have a hard time nominating them once. And just the
That's
sheer
true.
fact that we're doing better than ever before, but there are still way less films directed by women than men means that there's a smaller sample size. So as is the case with, you know, non-white straight men throughout history in any industry, for a woman to make the achievement of getting two nominations, they have to be so much better. So much better. And I do
Yes.
think Greta Gerwig has been the closest to coming to that. Possibly Catherine Bigelow, you can make the argument, was also really close. But she'll just have to have another successful at bat, sports metaphor or whatever.
Wow. Very good.
Was it?
Sort of.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it just comes down to lack of opportunity more than anything. There's still a gender imbalance when it comes to Hollywood directors, so it's just tougher to get another nomination, and the stakes are often so high for female directors, even the ones that prove themselves time after time, and it's a double standard. And I also think Greta has, she's just had the misfortune of being in years where it is much more competitive, I think, than usual. So, okay. Adam said, "What were you made for, Kevin?"
Oh dear.
Wow. This
think
caused
you're
much
doing it right
self-reflection.
now, what you were made for, not to,
Yeah, I'm proving it.
exactly.
Yeah, I was made to appreciate the art of cinema and actressing and connect with fellow freaks like me.
There you go. And I'm
So,
not taking that as an insult.
yes, exactly. What were you made for, Cody? I'm going to turn it on you.
I cannot say in a public forum.
Wow. Okay. Off the record. All right. Well, on that note, let us move on to Maestro. Okay. Beyond Best Picture, Maestro was nominated for Best Actor for Bradley Cooper, Best Actress for Carey Mulligan, Original Screenplay, Cinematography, Makeup and Hairstyling, and Sound, and it won nothing. So, joining Killers of the Flower Moon in that respect. But Maestro was a passion project for Bradley Cooper, bringing the life of the famous composer Leonard Bernstein and his relationship with his wife, Felicia Montelegre, to the screen. So the film mostly delves into that relationship and how it evolves over time, with Bradley playing Leonard and Carey Mulligan playing Felicia, as Leonard becomes a world-famous composer for operas and musicals and movies. Their relationship strains because he's also having affairs with men. So it's kind of a biopic about Leonard Bernstein, but it's largely a relationship drama at heart. So this is one that I think, despite getting 7 Oscar nominations in the end, kind of had a rocky road to getting there, with pretty high expectations after A Star is Born and a lot of feelings about Bradley playing a very famous Jewish man wearing a prosthetic nose. There was a feeling he might finally win his Oscar for this, but that also never took hold. But yeah, the film did stick through it, more or less, and got a lot of nominations, but perhaps not as many wins as Netflix and company may have hoped for. So what were your thoughts on Maestro?
So, thoughts are complicated on Maestro. I don't think it is quite the disaster that it kind of got dogpiled into being. However, I do think the root of this film's issues basically begin and end with the screenplay. So much so to the fact that I think that is the nomination I have the biggest issue with. This is so subjective, but I think the framing of the story and the way it's told and what it chooses to focus on is borderline troubling. I think it's really tough because I don't want to say that Leonard Bernstein's wife so much. I'm calling her his wife as opposed to her actual name, which just shows how she's been framed throughout history. I don't want to say her story is not worthy of being centered in a film, but I do think there's something a little bit disquieting about a group of ostensibly straight guys telling this story of this queer genius and it being almost entirely framed around his marriage of convenience to a woman. Now, that may make me sound hypocritical because I, like many others, am always decrying these standard biopics, and it maybe sounds like I wanted a more standard biopic of Leonard Bernstein, but I do think it speaks to the film's uh like troubled birth that the creators, Bradley Cooper and the writers and all that, chose to kind of almost intentionally subvert our expectations of biopic in a way that felt really intentional and almost like, do you see what I did there? You know, the fact that
Mhm.
West Side Story is reduced to like a musical cue that's kind of like a cheeky moment to be like the two sides of this marriage are squaring up. That to me just tells me all you need to know about this movie that is framing itself to be about this musical genius, that it is intentionally diverting away from his achievements at the expense of like understanding who he is as a person, or sorry, as an artist. So much so that you saw people kind of confused after the film, not really understanding anything about Leonard Bernstein because the film really expects you to know everything about him going in the door, which some people like myself do. West Side Story, the original one, is my favorite film of all time. So I'm well
Mhm.
acquainted with the achievements of Leonard Bernstein as a theater geek. And this movie is just it's frustrating because there is a story there to be told about his achievements and his marriage, and the film really sidestepped the former to elevate the latter in a way that feels like it's looking for credits. It's looking for people to go, "Oh, you did it so different. Congratulations. This is a different biopic. It's not like anything you'd expect."
Yeah. I didn't much care for Maestro, quite frankly. Looking back on it, especially, I just, you know, enjoyed a lot of the craft of it. Like Matthew Libatic's cinematography is
Hmm.
great, and the whole playing around with black and white and color, just really beautiful work, and the cutting between different eras. It's great stuff. And I even think both performances at the center are very good, but just like you, this for me the screenplay does not work at all. I also, just to add on to it, don't even think it is as insightful about marriage and
No.
how hard it is to have a very public marriage and the pressures of that, plus him dealing with his sexuality. Like, I just feel like it's sort of like it's nothing we haven't seen before in other biopics dealing with that kind of stuff, and I'm just so bored from that kind of story. Which is not to say we can't have great ones that deal with similar emotional themes, but it's just that foundation, just it doesn't come together for me. Like, it's full of really great individual sequences, like the big cathedral scene towards the end is really cool, but I wish I got more out of it than I ultimately did. Like, this is another one where I'm just like, I kind of didn't feel anything
Yeah. And
getting to the
it's
end of it.
like my go-to like shitty biopic is Bohemian Rhapsody.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, this movie is trying not to be that standardized, like Wikipedia entry biopic. And yet I come out of it with the same feeling of like, this is telling a queer genius's story through such a hetero framing in a way that just makes me feel, I don't want to use like discriminatory language here, but it does feel like troubling is the word I keep coming back to. It's like, why do you feel the need to reduce this person's achievements in favor of elevating the standards of heteronormativity that they either were trying or failed to accomplish, um,
Yeah.
in a way that just makes it feel like straight is still the default. And I don't necessarily think all of this was actively on Bradley Cooper's mind when he made this movie, but it still is a result of what he chose to focus on in his filmmaking.
Yes. And I think it is a result of someone who was obsessed with Leonard Bernstein's story and maybe assuming that everyone else had that same base knowledge, and he wanted to, you know, tell the more interesting story behind the scenes that people don't already know. But when I see the story, I'm like, well, I kind of could have predicted most of what I saw, quite
Sure.
frankly.
Yeah.
So it's like, now what?
No. So what now?
um, yeah, so what now? Yeah, but fun also, like the Thanksgiving sequence with Snoopy going by in the float. That was fun.
Yeah, the one
I don't
time the
know.
film leans into like queer sensibilities in camp is
Yeah,
like with a
I
Snoopy balloon.
yeah, I'll take what I can get. And also him playing the bongos on Matt Bomer's ass at the beginning.
Okay,
Just
relatable.
saying. Okay, so there you go. Um Yeah, so let's just get to these two questions here. Greg Cramine, both A Star is Born and Maestro came in hot for award season, but seemed to quickly disappear from the conversation. Why? Is it a case of hype over substance?
I really don't know what it is about Bradley Cooper that leads these to this happening repeatedly. Because if it was just Maestro, I'd be like, I get it. But A Star is Born, this is subjective again, but I really like that movie. I think it is a very, very impressive directorial debut. I think both of those lead performances are exceptional. I think it is well made. I think it is telling a story. It's doing the thing that Maestro wants to do, which is like telling a well-worn story in a new way, but achieves it and does it
Right.
well and with
Mhm.
bringing something new to this story that we know so well. Um, I don't know why this keeps happening to him, and I'm sure he's asking the same question. It's really odd. I mean, you could say maybe he's too pretty. Like the Oscars, I know that sounds weird, but like the Oscars have a weird time awarding like handsome, youngerish men. We know this throughout
Yeah.
history. Um, Maybe that's a factor. I don't know. It's a very odd pattern. It's as odd to me as Scorsese's 10 nomination films, zero
Yeah.
Oscars wins.
Yeah. Well, once this happens a third time for Bradley, then we'll have to really open up the investigation.
Sure.
Yeah, I think hype is definitely a part of what led to, this sounds dramatic, but the downfall of both films.
No, really.
I
Exactly.
think he's a guy who is very eager to prove himself, and that can lead to some people to perceive that as desperation, which people don't find attractive. And he takes these big swings, and he's still so young in his directing career that, like, I don't know, maybe there is that feeling of, well, you haven't quite gotten there yet, kid, even though he's not really a kid anymore. But, like, compared to Scorsese and all these people, like, have really proved themselves and are seasoned directors, for him, he's still in that proving himself mode. So
Right, which is
it's
funny
tough.
because he's directed two Best Picture nominees out of two
Yeah,
films, just like Greta Gerwig. Perfect track
true.
record, basically.
Yeah, but has not gotten a director nomination. So
Sorry, buddy.
yes, he has to make whatever his version of, like, Reds is.
My instinct was to say I'd watch that, but maybe not with that much excitement.
Fair enough. Well, the ghost of Glenda Miss Jackson, if you nasty, said, "Why are people so rude to Bradley Cooper and Maestro?"
I do
Yeah,
think that
Cody, why are they?
whoa, I do think the dogpiling got a little out of control. I don't think this is
Yes.
a movie, even if I have issues with its execution, that was made with fully bad intentions. I think a lot of the critiques that I and others have are kind of just because of, I don't know, not seeing the forest from the trees in terms of what they were doing. Um, it's easy to pile onto a handsome rich millionaire, oxymoron. It's easy to pile onto that type of person who seems to have it all in his life, which, I wouldn't argue. I would love to have some of the ability that Bradley Cooper does, even just a little bit, to, work and throughout this world. But I
Mhm.
think that's kind of the root of it. I think it's really easy to root for somebody who seemingly has it all uh, when they are so earnest with what they want. Both A Star is Born and Maestro are were framed through Bradley Cooper as this, like, I had to get this out of me. I had to tell this story. And that can work. I feel like A Star is Born, people felt kind of bad for the marks he missed throughout that award season, and then those same marks getting missed this award season and were a source of delight for some.
Yeah, it is a feeling of, like, don't you have enough already? Now
Yeah.
you want to be the auteur director. But I think one of the points you made is very accurate, which is that earnestness does not play well in today's society, quite frankly, in
No.
many directions. And so I think that he's a very earnest guy. There's very lack of irony in his films thus far. So yeah, we'll see where he goes from here. I don't know.
Mhm.
I hope he's doing okay.
Bradley, are you okay? If you're
Yeah.
listening.
Yes. All right. Well, let's move on to American Fiction. Well, American Fiction Beyond Best Picture, nominated for Best Actor for Jeffrey Wright, Supporting Actor for Sterling K. Brown, and Original Score, and it won Adapted Screenplay for Cord Jefferson, the writer and director. This was his first feature film, so pretty big deal. This is based on Erasure, the novel by Percival Everett, which is about a writer, Professor Thelonious Monk Ellison, who is disgruntled with the way Black stories are based in stereotypes and how they seem to be all the publishing industry wants. And he writes a very stereotypical story called My Pathology, kind of as a whim. But then he's surprised to see just how much it takes off and gets the interest of white publishers. And meanwhile, he's also dealing with his dementia-ridden mother and the death of his sister and also his brother, who's recently come out as gay. So he's dealing with his own stuff too. Lots being juggled here. But what were your thoughts on American Fiction?
American Fiction really was kind of the surprise of the season. It kind of came out of nowhere at TIFF and then won the Audience Award, which immediately put it firmly in the Best Picture race, which it never deviated from. I think this is not the movie's fault, but for people like myself and perhaps some listening who are maybe too online, a lot of the talking points and examinations that this film moved through and presented as revelatory felt a little old hat, if not retrograde. Like it felt like the conversation was a little bit behind, which is not to say that the talking points were not worthy of being brought up, but I think the fact that this is based on a novel, which I didn't know when I first watched it, that was over 20 years old. I didn't read the novel, so I don't know how much they changed, kind of underlines that point. It feels like a lot of it's putting in amber a lot of things that seem to have been already established in the cultural conversation at that point, which is all well and good. It's nice to have a record of such things, I suppose, but none of this really felt new to me in the way that the film was presenting it as. The film was presenting it as, and was clearly received by a lot of people as something, as a new perspective or examining new talking points that certain audiences hadn't been privy to up to that point. Which just makes the whole thing for people like myself a little bit tiring, I want to say. I also didn't find the movie that funny, which is totally subjective. I understand, and I have a weird standard for comedy, but it doesn't really work as a comedic piece, regardless of other content for me. That being said, I love Jeffrey Wright. He's one of my favorite working actors, and I'm so happy he's finally an Oscar nominee. Not for his most exciting work, I would say, but still, he gets to say he's an Oscar nominee forever now, which is fine by me. And I just think this movie leans a lot on audience reaction and gets away with a lot of things that would otherwise be an issue because of the reaction. Like the filmmaking, I don't think is anything revelatory at all. It is very standard. It's a lot of just kind of put the camera there and let the screenplay do a lot of the work. And then to people like myself, when the screenplay isn't really even working that well, it doesn't really amount to a full enjoyable cinematic package.
Yeah. Well, I have to say we are surprisingly on the same page on this one. Yes. I struggled with this in a disappointing way for me because I was really looking forward to it. Even based on the trailers, the concept, it seemed like it was going to be much sharper and funnier than it actually ended up being for me. I do think the problem is that there was a feeling I was getting as I was watching it, which admittedly I didn't see in the theater. I saw it at home, so maybe that made a slight difference, but the film kind of mocks well-meaning white liberals, but I couldn't help but feel like it was sort of satisfying that same audience at the same time, if that makes sense, in terms of like laughing at all of these obvious things that white people say and whatnot, and sort of laughing about it with their friends. And it wasn't a surprise to learn that it was based on a novel from 2001, sort of like you said. Maybe if it had come out like after Precious or like other films like that, it would have been a little more, biting or refreshing, but I just don't know how relevant it feels anymore. Like, I'm sure this is still an issue within the publishing world for sure, but there is something about it that I can't quite put my finger on, but it feels very like Obama administration in its very broad depiction of like, again, like well-meaning but clueless white liberals and that whole thing. And I also don't think it really balances the tones all that well between the broad comedy and the very sincere family drama. So the screenplay win I get just because it has a very writer-friendly quality to it, but I do just struggle with the execution ultimately, which could be a directing thing more so too, but yeah, I mean, like, Jeffrey Wright is fantastic. So happy he finally got a nomination. And he really, I think, really does a lot of the work in terms of grounding the film and making that internal conflict his character feel very real. So,
Yeah,
yeah, it's
I
tough.
feel like a lot of the things that the film could easily be critiqued for, especially in the filmmaking, the content of the screenplay and what it was exploring thematically kind of made excuses for those. I don't want to sound too harsh, but yeah, it did feel kind of like very clear why a an audience at, I'm generalizing, but the Toronto International Film Festival would appreciate a movie like this.
Yes, for better or for worse. Yeah.
Exactly.
And I also didn't love the Sterling K. Brown performance, personally.
No, I think weirdly, I saw some talk of this, but it didn't really get discussed how unexplored he was as a queer character and it was very reductive and like so much of this movie, very seemingly retrograde. To your point,
Hmm.
would have felt really exciting to see a character like this 20 years ago, but we're not in 2001 anymore. It's 2023.
Yeah. I wish I had slightly more positive things to say on it, but
I
um,
wanted to like the movie so much more than I did, and I think you
right?
did too.
Yeah.
I really was
Yeah.
excited for this film. I was excited for a movie that came out of nowhere to be in the Oscar race. That's always exciting. The content, the cast is amazing. It's a stacked
Amazing.
ensemble. So I put I put the screener in with such excitement, and it did not it did not match my expectations. Similar to Maestro, I had a very similar reaction to Maestro, which I was very excited for.
Yeah. I think maybe a little too smug for me at times as a film. A little self-satisfied,
Mhm.
but a lot of people liked it, so clearly it won adapted screenplay. So
Exactly.
what do I know?
And like the adapted screenplay win, obviously it worked on a lot of people, but like it just kind of feels like an adapted screenplay winner on paper. If you just kind of explain what the film was about and didn't even see it, it makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense to win that category.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Handsome said, after winning Best Adapted Screenplay, how close do you think American Fiction was to winning Best Picture?
I think it was definitely in the top half. I would say maybe somewhere between 2 to 4. I think we have seen in
Wow.
recent years that a screenplay win is more important than any other category when it comes to Best Picture chances, arguably. And this film, I can see a lot of people putting it very high on their ballot.
Yeah, definitely the kind of film that does really well on a preferential ballot. So definitely, I would say top five in the end. Maybe not even at the nomination stage, but by the time they
Right.
voted on winners, I think so. I mean, it won the BAFTA for Best Adapted Screenplay, with that being its only nomination. So,
Right. Sort of a Coda situation where in a year of
yeah,
five it may not have even gotten into Best Picture, but by the end of the race it was
yeah.
doing well.
I mean, I don't think it was quite the runner-up necessarily, but listen, kudos to Cord Jefferson for, beating what would be the Best Picture winner, Oppenheimer, in that screenplay category. So,
Exactly.
not an easy task. We'll be also interested to see what he does next.
Sure. Yeah. No, I am excited to see what he
I
does
loved his
next. I think
speech.
I
I'll
loved his
say
speech.
that.
I think he is a writer with talent. I just
Yeah,
don't think this screenplay exhibited it fully in a way that satisfied me as an audience member.
right.
Back in a
Well,
compliment.
let's. It's all about satisfying Cody.
You said it, not
I'm just
me.
kidding. Yep. All right. Let's move on to the holdovers. So, beyond Best Picture, Holdovers nominated for Best Actor for Paul Giamatti, Original Screenplay, and Film Editing, and it won Best Supporting Actress for Da'Vine Joy Randolph. So, The Holdovers is an Alexander Payne film. It's had been quite a while since an Alexander Payne film got Oscar recognition. Not that he had a lot of options, but it had been 10 years since Nebraska, and in between, he only had downsizing, but still. Worth noting that Payne did not actually write the film. It originally came from David Hemmingson, loosely based on his experiences growing up. It's set in 1970 at a New England boarding school, and it's about this unlikely trio that bond over the Christmas break. Paul Giamatti plays Paul Hunnam, a very stubborn classics teacher who is charged with looking after this student Angus, played by newcomer Dominic Sessa, who doesn't have anywhere to go during the break. And then Da'Vine Joy Randolph plays Mary, the school's cafeteria manager who lost her son in the Vietnam War. So it's all about the three of them bonding and being there for each other during the holidays and just helping each other get to a better place in their lives. So what did you think of The Holdovers? And also, Da'Vine sweeping in the way she did too.
I love a movie or a story in general about a chosen family or a found family or an alternate family. And this movie about people that are, for one reason or another, alone at Christmas and bond over that. That is always going to appeal to me. I don't know if this quite reached the heights of cinema classic to me, but I can see a world where this becomes a frequent revisit around Christmas time. I know Alexander Payne would punch me in the mouth for saying this, but I do find it to be a very warm and cozy movie. Sorry.
Maybe he took such offense to that.
Yeah, maybe don't make your movie look like that then if you don't want me to say that. I love Paul Giamatti. There was a time where I thought he was going to win the Oscar for a long time, actually, until probably SAG. I thought that performance, just plus the overdue nature of his career, was really going to get him on the podium. And Da'Vine Joy Randolph, as a theater geek who's known about her existence since her nomination for Ghost the Musical, look it up. I'm always excited to see people like that do well in other more populist realms. And I loved her performance in Dolomite Is My Name. I would have nominated her for that personally. So seeing her get a win here made me so happy.
Yeah. I loved this movie, I must say. It's so up my alley to begin with. Period piece set in the 70s, character study, motley crew of people trying to get through this one point in time in their lives, even though they may not see each other again. Chosen family, like you said, very humanistic, grounded, great soundtrack, amazing performances. It has everything for me. It's just like check all the way down, like fan service for exactly what I like to see in a film. I love the atmosphere of it, the coziness, but also the slight melancholy to it too. I think it has the right mix of exactly how a lot of people feel during the holidays, which is not always cheerful. Love seeing Paul Giamatti just totally own this role that he was born to play.
Yep.
Dominic Sessa, an incredible discovery, and really seems right out of the 70s. It's really remarkable. Da'Vine, such a lived-in, sensitive performance, and just immediately gives that character a sense of history. And so glad she won that Oscar, even if it was such a done deal leading up to it. But yeah, this is another one I'm excited to rewatch in the years to come. And even if there are parts that I would maybe cut down a little bit, like the beginning section with all the other kids, I really had such a great time with it. So it would rank towards the top for me in terms of preferential ballot.
Getting to see this on 35mm was a treat. It's not a movie that feels like it needs to be seen in that format in the way that a Nolan movie does, but it really even further sold the transportive quality of really feeling like not only is this a movie that takes place in the 70s, but it maybe is a movie that the characters in the film would watch at the time it took place.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely thought of a Hal Ashby in that particular vibe.
Yep.
So yeah, well, sadly we did not get any questions for The Holdovers.
Oh, okay.
Don't know what happened there, but I guess we'll just move on.
It did feel like I feel like in the expanded era there's always 2 or 3 movies that are in the best picture lineup that are just kind of there. They're maybe going to pick up one other Oscar. They never have a real chance at best picture, but they're among the best of the year.
Yeah, and that is one of them. Yep. All right. Well, our last Best Picture nominee to talk about here is Past Lives. So beyond Best Picture, the only other nomination Past Lives got was Original Screenplay, which it did not win. So this had by far the fewest nominations of the 10 Best Picture nominees, with the others having at least 5 each. But what it lacked in Oscar love, it certainly made up for as a critic's darling and certainly a darling of film Twitter. So Past Lives is the feature directorial debut of Celine Song, who also wrote the screenplay, somewhat based on her own experiences, and it's about two friends, Na Young and Hae Sung, who grow up in South Korea, and they date briefly when they're 12 years old, but then the connection is severed when Na Young's parents uproot to go live in Toronto, so they lose touch. They reconnect 12 years later online, where Na Young's living in New York and she's changed her name to Nora Moon, and they have a great time connecting, but then she cuts it off to try and focus on her life in New York. She meets and marries Arthur, a fellow writer, and another 12 years pass, and Hae Sung decides to reunite with Nora in person, so he travels to New York, and the two of them ponder what their life could have been like if she had stayed in South Korea. And Greta Lee and Teo Yu play them in their adult age. So, yes, what were your thoughts on Past Lives, this little indie darling in this lineup?
There's nothing better than a right person, wrong time love story. It is just, if the holdovers was what's going to just naturally work for you, this is the kind of thing that just is going to work for me. And
Yeah.
it just always is effective storytelling. It is something that most of us have experienced at some point. It is relatable, and heartbreaking, but also not devastating, if that makes sense. It just feels,
Yeah.
the movie feels invigorating even in its sadness. And even using sadness as a descriptor for this film feels wrong because it's not a sad movie. It is very aware, and every character in it is very aware of the situation and never pretends that it's not what it is, if that makes sense. It's
Yes.
about the life you could have led, but you wouldn't sacrifice the one you have for it, which is tough. That's a tough thing to explore, and I think this film does it with such delicacy and maturity. I can totally see why so many people just fell in love with it. I was at Sundance when this premiered, and the word on the mouth was, you got to see this movie. I've heard great things because it wasn't one of the big titles before the festival. It didn't have the hype going into the festival that some of the other films there did, with bigger names attached or more starry whatever. And it was also one of the few films that you couldn't watch at home as well as at the festival. You had to watch it at the festival. So it was by far the most crowded screening I went to because everybody was packed into this house, and the reaction was just incredible. And I'm so glad I was able to be there to see, the birth of an Oscar contender carry through across 14 months to the next year and successfully stay in the Oscar race.
Yeah. That must have been very fun. Like, there's always that nice thrill when you feel like something hasn't been hyped as an awards darling, and you just walk into it because you're excited to watch it, and then it blows you away and it organically becomes something. So
yep. Same thing happened with Coda, but that was more like, oh, interesting. This,
yeah.
I watched that on my couch at 10 a.m. and now it's winning Best Picture.
Yeah. Well, Past Lives is also one that really hit home for me. I know it became very talked about and discussed a lot online to the point that I feel like I saw a little factions of backlash after a while, but I really connected with it a lot and just found it very sensitive and very confident, especially for a film debut, feature film debut. Greta Lee is great. Teo Yu, I think, is honestly even better and was just like really the one I hoped would get more nominations than he got.
He got the BAFTA nom, right? Did that happen?
He did. Yeah. It's
kind
true.
of unexpected.
Yeah, but inspired. Yeah, I actually had a similar sort of fate in my life where I had a neighbor who I hung out with, played with all the time growing up, and we were really close. And then she moved away around the same time of like 11 or 12. And losing that connection was pretty painful, honestly. And I think the film really channels all the mixed emotions of that, of recognizing that you've both changed and your lives have taken very different paths, but also how would things have been different if that connection was still there and it wasn't broken. And so, I think all of that is really just gorgeously told here.
Yeah, Past Lives does what the best art can do, which is take a feeling or experience or emotion that is hard to define or categorize, and kind of crystallizes it into an object that now people can forever point to. Oh, it's just like Past Lives. And that's some of like the best thing that art can do is reflect the human experience in a way that is specific and yet universal. And this movie just
Yeah,
phenomenally achieves that.
absolutely. Very, very emotional. So let's see if we got. Oh, yes. Jonathan Edwards said Zone of Interest and Past Lives are the only Best Picture nominees without acting nominations. Who from those films would you nominate? And which nominees would they replace? Hmm.
It's tough because I do think the way that the Academy Awards this year shook out is pretty good in terms of nominations. From past lives, it's obvious Greta Lee is just incredible, and I would so have been okay with her being nominated. And I'm so sorry, but there's a very obvious fifth place for me in Best Actress. I'm so sorry, Annette. Um, and then for Zone of Interest, hmm, I guess Sandra Hüller is my favorite performance in that film, and she's very good. But for me, the performances are like and this is no slight, but like sixth or seventh thing I talk about when it comes to that movie.
Yeah.
So I guess if I had to replace somebody in supporting actress, my least favorite is probably Danielle Brooks in The Color Purple, but I
Hmm.
don't really want to take away that nomination, and I don't feel strongly enough about Sandra Hüller that I would replace her necessarily.
Fair enough.
And I
Yeah.
would
I
say there's an
mean,
argument that both those actresses were sixth place for their categories, so it wasn't outside the realm of possibility.
probably. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think I would. I mean, I would also nominate Teo Yu and probably replace Coleman Domingo. Ultimately, I
Oh
just don't love
no.
Rustin. Yeah. Yeah.
Sure, Rustin for me is a bad movie. Like there's like 80% of it that is just bad, and then 20% of it is just such a good performance from Colin Domingo. So it's maybe I'm
It is a
grading on a
really good
curve.
performance.
And I
But
just love
yeah.
him, another theater person that I've been into for
Hmm.
15 years or so. So
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe Bradley Cooper also is in the discussion of being taken out for me of that group, but I think it's a really strong best actor lineup, honestly. So
all four
it's
acting
tough.
categories this year, there's one or two weak spots in them, arguably, but this is this isn't Best Actor of the Year that Leo won. There's not a category
No.
that is just like a crumbling foundation below the winner.
Yeah. And then, yeah, Greta Lee, I would put in place of Annette Bening, all
Yeah.
due respect. And supporting actress, I might slot in Sandra Hüller. I think there are others that weren't nominated that I would put above her. But if I had to, put her in and that was my only option, I would probably put her in over Emily Blunt.
Ooh,
Yep.
I wouldn't be too sad about that.
Yep. I think there are other performances she has that I would much rather have been an Oscar nomination other than the wife
Sure.
character.
What if
You
there
know,
was one?
what if there was one? Indeed. And she inhabited that with
She did
alcohol in hand. Yep.
that.
All right. Captain Jimmy D. A little bit of a lengthy one, maybe, but we'll see. If you could give one Oscar for each nominee, Best Picture nominee, what would it be and why? We don't have to get into why, but
Why? Tell me why. So would it have to be of the actual nominees?
that was not specified.
Question mark?
So,
Okay,
loophole.
okay. Um, let's see. Oppenheimer, I would vote for Best Picture. Sorry. My
Okay.
favorite of the year. Again, every time I said that the past year, I did feel like I had to apologize because it was so boring and obvious, but I can't help it. It just spoke
You're such a
so
populist.
That's me. It just spoke so highly to my interests and all
What
that.
a normie.
You know me, typical Cody.
Yep.
American fiction, that is tough. I really liked the score by
Okay.
Laura Karpman, which got a surprise nomination. So I would not have
Mm-hmm.
been heartbroken if that won. I think Oppenheimer's score is pretty obviously my favorite of that category, which is not the greatest lineup. That John Williams nomination,
No, very bad.
whatever.
No
The
good, very
Poor
bad.
Things score is, um, you know, it's not nice to listen to, which isn't the mark
Not
of
not
a
one you listen to outside of the movie.
no. And even in the movie, I'm like so many other things. We get it, girl. We get it.
Yeah.
Anatomy of a Fall. I think the screenplay or Sandra Hüller, no question. Those are the two greatest elements. Barbie, I think they got it right with the song. I think the song is really great, and I think it's much better than Billie Eilish's first win. That I've had that James Bond song so boring. The Holdovers, if Paul Giamatti had won, I would not have been too sad. Cillian Murphy was my ultimate pick, but this would have been a good win for Paul Giamatti. That would have both been, it would be the ideal, it's a career win and you did a great job in this movie we like to win. It would be very hard to argue against that win. Killers of the Flower Moon, Lily Gladstone, no question. Next. Maestro, the cinematography is incredible. I would have voted for the cinematography regardless of what I thought of the movie itself. I thought it was really well framed. Libatique is one of my favorite DPs working today. I think the movie just looked exceptional from start to finish. Even if I do think some of what Bradley Cooper was going for with the visuals and the technical elements of the film was almost too ornate at times. Like it was trying very hard to be a big, event picture, which it's a movie about, a man who has like concert halls named after him. So maybe that's appropriate given the subject matter. But the cinematography I have no issues with that, regardless of what else I think of the movie. Past Lives, we're kind of struggling with nominations here, but if that won original screenplay over Anatomy of a Fall, that would be just fine. My vote went to May December personally, but Past Lives is a lovely runner-up.
We'll get to it.
Poor Things, costumes, no question. That would have gotten my vote easily. And then Zone of Interest, director. I would have voted for Jonathan Glazer over Nolan easily. I think what he did in terms of his perspective for the film and what he brought to that adaptation, and what it did to those watching it lingered with me and many others way longer than most movies this year or any other year.
Very good. That's a very good selection there.
Thank you.
That would have been a fun alternative history if all those came to pass. Here's what I came up with for mine. Poor Things, costume design. I totally agree. Oppenheimer, honestly, film editing. Killers of the Flower Moon, definitely Lily Gladstone, no question. Zone of Interest, I like your director pick, but I will keep Best Sound because that is one of the most inspired sound wins in quite some time.
For sure.
Anatomy of a Fall is easy original screenplay for me. Barbie, I might say Ryan Gosling.
Okay. He's great.
I think that would be fun. Maestro, makeup and hair, which seems lazy, but they put in the work.
It's impressive. It just is.
Yeah.
Like you can screen grab it and make fun of it all you want. It is impressive makeup work. There's no questioning it.
American Fiction, honestly, Jeffrey Wright.
Sure.
Wouldn't have minded. Yeah. The Holdovers, Davine Joy Randolph is fine with me winning for that. And Past Lives, I mean, I already said original screenplay for Anatomy of a Fall, but they can tie. How about that? It's my rules.
It's a tie.
Yes. All right. Matthew Anderson said, since we've gone back to a field of more than 5 films nominated for Best Picture, would you consider this your favorite lineup we've had, or do you think there's another lineup that's better than this?
We've had some good ones recently. I think 2017 is phenomenal. If the weakest film there is, I guess, Darkest Hour, which is still pretty good. 2010 is also pretty great. And then
That's mine.
I mean, that one's hard to argue with. I don't even know what my lowest one would be. I guess Kids Are All Right.
King's Speech.
Whoa.
For me.
Take that, Academy.
The winner. Yep.
And then 21, 22, 23 have all been good. I have little to argue with there. I wouldn't have voted for the same winners as in 21, 22, but I do think the highs are so high and the lows are not so low, which
the lows are not bad.
The lows are fine, which for the Academy is really saying something. So
a step in the right direction.
It's been very satisfying in the past few years being an Oscar obsessive because it feels like we're in a good era. Like I feel like we're going to look back. We're only halfway through the decade, but so far this decade with high regard.
Yeah. They don't seem as out of touch, perhaps.
Correct.
Even in the 2010s, there were years where it's like, okay.
Right, 2011. What the hell was that?
Exactly what I'm thinking of. Well, Ben Miller said, as far as top to bottom, is this one of the best lineups in Best Picture history? 96 years.
Tough. I do think, not to dogpile, there are more weak years than strong years. So I guess by that decree, I would say yes. I don't think this is as good as something like 75 or 76, which are, to me, the absolute peak of American filmmaking and Oscar recognition aligning. But it's in the top quarter, top 10 maybe even. It's up there for sure.
I'll allow it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there is a little bit of recency bias when people claim that it is like one of the absolute best in history. But certainly one of the best we've had, at least in the 21st century. I'll say that.
Fair. I would agree with that.
We'll see how history lasts for this lineup. Alicio said, which film have you revisited the most since last season?
I don't rewatch films a ton. Of these, the only ones I watched more than once are Past Lives, because I saw it at Sundance, and then again in general release. And then Barbie I saw twice, and Oppenheimer I saw it twice in theaters, and then once I watched it the day of the Oscars as kind of like a victory lap, knowing it was going to win.
Cute.
Yeah.
And Poor Things, I guess, too.
Oh, right. I watched Poor Things twice, yeah. For this very podcast.
I know it was a long time ago,
Not why
but
we were
we
even
did
here.
talk about Poor Things. Yes. Yeah, the only movies I've watched again are Barbie, The Holdovers, and now Poor Things. Nothing else. So we'll see how it goes. Revisiting some. I could definitely see myself watching Barbie and The Holdovers and Past Lives probably. And
Yeah.
that might be it.
It's also a lineup of a lot of long movies, which is no slight against them. It just makes it hard to quite literally find the time to rewatch, say, Killers of the Flower Moon.
Right. Well, we got this question from 3 different people. Grace, Kogan, Adam, and Christoph. If this was a year of only 5 Best Picture nominees, which 5 would have made the cut?
So I
always love this question.
Yeah, I thought about this one. I do think, even though, as previously mentioned, I think it was up there for Best Picture, I don't think American Fiction makes it, and maybe is a just screenplay no picture winner, which happened not infrequently back in the day of 5. Obviously, Oppenheimer gets in, I think, and you gotta again place yourself where you were in like late January in terms of buzz. So in which case, I think Barbie gets in, I think Poor Things gets in, I think Killers gets in, and then it's tough. Then I think it's either Zone or Anatomy. And I'm thinking maybe it was Zone based on the nominations it ended up getting, which were more surprising than what Anatomy got. Meaning Anatomy is the lone director nomination, which feels correct. But I think it's either of those two for the last slot. I'm not quite convinced which one it would be.
Yeah, I agree with Oppenheimer, Poor Things. Killers of the Flower Moon, I think all feel very safe as the 5. And then Barbie to a slightly lesser extent, but I do think, yes, but in that late January phase was probably enough to get top 5. And I can imagine there was some passion vote there to get that in there. And then I would say Anatomy of a Fall, personally, just because it did get a film editing nomination, which is often tied to Best Picture. The Holdovers also got a film editing nomination, but I don't know if it quite was top 5 necessarily. Yeah, I would love to say Zone of Interest. I don't know if it had quite enough momentum at that point to get top 5, but, I could see it. Yeah.
It's really easy to say Maestro, Past Lives, and probably American Fiction are not in.
Yeah,
I think that's
agreed.
Hard to argue with.
Yeah. Watching at Home said, if there were only 5 nominations for Best Picture, which films would you have chosen as the nominees of these 10 films?
Of these 10 films, let's see. Oppenheimer, obviously. Zone of Interest, close behind. And then I would go Past Lives. Those are my very obvious top 3. And then probably Barbie and Killers of the Flower Moon.
Okay. Yeah. I would share Oppenheimer and Zone of Interest and Killers of the Flower Moon and add in The Holdovers and Anatomy of a Fall.
That makes a lot of sense.
That's my ballot.
All right.
Well, Amanda BW said, which of these was the movie that the discourse/film Twitter made you hate by the end of the season, whether it be from the stands or just overall fatigue?
So I'm not somebody who really lets the discourse affect their opinion of a thing, or at least I try not to be. I like to think I'm not. I did think the Maestro discourse at a little time was like, okay, guys, relax. It's not winning any Oscars. And some of the reads of Poor Things, I was like, did you engage with this film on any level besides just absorbing it with no thought behind your viewing? A lot of the reads of it being like, but she's a baby and they want to have sex with her, as if that wasn't the point of the movie, was driving me nuts. I'm like, let's engage with the art a little bit, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I tried my best to separate the intense discourse about Barbie separate that from my own viewing experience, which was great, and I loved it. And I tried not to let the overwhelming amount of discourse in terms of what the movie represented, the fact that it was feminism 101, a lot of people said, with the whole America Ferrera speech. Just a lot, like, culturally speaking, was discussed with Barbie that I was just like, I just like it for what it is, and I just don't want to, allow myself to just be like constantly engaged in like almost culture wars about this movie, Yeah, but it didn't affect my feeling like any worse about Barbie. So
no, a lot of the Barbie like discourse became it was one of those things where it spilled over into the real world outside of our isolated
which is always
Barbie world.
dangerous.
Like exactly. So like there were
suddenly
a lot of
political figures are getting involved with it. Yeah.
Exactly. And so there was a lot of locals suddenly having opinions about the best director race. And then obviously so many of them just did not even know who Justine Triet was and were acting like Greta Gerwig didn't get a writing nomination, which again does not excuse snubs, if you want to call them that, or does not negate the idea of sexism, but it was just a lot of bad faith critiques, which really gets on my nerves. But again, is not the movie's fault.
Yes. Separate things. This is a very detailed question. You don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but this is from Chelsea. Pair these films with seasons of Survivor. For example, Micronesia is Barbie Girls Run the World vibes. Amazon could be Anatomy of a Fall because Hot Girl makes it through and gets away with it. Those are some of Chelsea's examples. You are a Survivor watcher. I don't know if you've seen every season, but don't know if you saw this question, delved into this too much.
Here's the thing. I watched Survivor in quarantine. So my partner and I sped through seasons 1 through 20 in about a year, but I have not picked it up since then. So I'm a little out of touch here. Amazon's like season 6, right?
Yeah.
Side note, that's my partner. The winner of that season was his childhood neighbor. They had a parade for her.
Oh, Jenna Maraska?
Yep, they had a parade.
Oh my God.
Everything. Yeah, very exciting.
Wow.
Just a fun little fact. But so I cannot answer this question, unfortunately.
Okay. Well, this is for the true Survivor hardcore stans. All of this will hopefully make sense to them, or maybe to you, because I have a few for early years too.
Yeah, I know how the game is played.
Yes. Okay. Well, I'll do American Fiction, which is Cook Islands, a season that divided the tribes by race. And we had certain players kind of reconciling with that and trying to transcend stereotypes. That makes sense, right?
Sounds like a good idea for TV. My God.
Yep. Love that. Love that. The holdovers, I'm going to say, is Survivor 44, because it was about this motley crew, a trio, actually, of very unlikely alliance members who got to the end. Killers of the Flower Moon is Island of the Idols, because, sorry, this is going to get a little dark, but there were bad things happening on that season behind the scenes, and it was not dealt with properly until things started happening more. I don't want to delve too far into it, but it's a very dark season.
I will Wikipedia that later.
Okay. Maestro is China, because it's about a gay man, Todd Herzog, who pulled off a virtuoso performance at Final Tribal, and he got to the end with his girls. So,
slay.
Yes,
Work
slay.
diva.
Right? Past Lives, I'm going to say, is Second Chance, because it was all about one-time players coming back to see if they could do what they couldn't last time and win the game. What could have been? I don't know. Poor Things, I'm going to say, is actually the Amazon, which was, the first Battle of the Sexes season, and Jenna was sort of discounted a lot as this young 21-year-old at the time, and she made this unlikely journey to the win. The Zone of Interest, I don't think there's a season thematically that's like the Zone of Interest, so I will just make a very surface level pairing and say One World, because the tribes live together on the same beach. How about that?
Okay.
So right next door sort of thing. Anatomy of a Fall actually makes sense for Amazon as well, like Chelsea said. Yeah, so I have Oppenheimer left, which I'm going to say is Borneo, the very first season.
All right.
Because it kicked off the reality competition craze, and, again, can't put the toothpaste back in the tube there. And the Oppenheimer in this case is like Mark Burnett, who also got the power to make The Apprentice, which helped make Donald Trump who he is today.
Oh my God. Kevin,
Thank
that's
you.
really good. Bravo.
That's it. Thank you. Steffi Akane said, interested in you and your guest Best Picture ranking. I'm going to save that actually to the end, if we could, just because it'll spoil the final verdict. Joey Gentili, of course. Which film would Karen Black have been the best lead in?
I mean, Poor Things would be kind of wild.
Yeah. She has that Poor Things energy.
Or Barbie.
Yeah. Or Oppenheimer.
Or Maestro.
Yes. Why not? Why not?
Really make it like a drag race acting challenge.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, Oscar H. If Dune Part 2 came out this season as it was supposed to, which film would it have replaced?
It's easy to go like the number 10, I guess it's Past Lives, so probably Past Lives, unfortunately, which is a bummer. What I'd be interested in seeing, though, is it would totally restructure so many of these below the line races, where I think like movies like Maestro and Holdovers and Killers suddenly see their nomination count like severely reduced because of Dune Part 2 is a really strong player in those categories. That would be more interesting to me than what gets bumped out of Best Picture.
Yeah. Kareem Balak, this is another exercise for us, but I don't know if you did this one. Switch around the directors of the Best Picture nominees. Who should direct which film instead of the one they did?
I did. This was tough. I thought about this one.
Tough but fun.
Yeah. And here's what I landed on. It's a little obvious, and maybe I don't want to see a man direct this movie, but Yorgos Lanthimos doing Barbie, which Poor Things already has parallels with, would be very interesting. I would love to see, tapping back into his roots of his first few movies, Scorsese do The Holdovers. I think that would be kind of he hasn't done a movie like that in a while. I can't even think of what his most recent one would be. Justine Triet, I think, would do fun things with Poor Things. Gendered expectations there. How people communicate is a big part of both those films. So I would be interested to see what she does with both of them. Both set all over Europe. So there you go.
True.
I think Christopher Nolan's hermetic and clinical predilections and interests would work well for Zone of Interest. Another World War II movie also. So familiar territory for him. And then Jonathan Glazer, similarly, tapping more into something like he does in some of his earlier work, not necessarily Zone of Interest, but I think his take on Anatomy of a Fall will be very interesting. He likes to look into perspective a lot and how that informs people's actions. And so I think that would be an interesting reassignment there.
Yeah, good call. Was that all of them? I don't even know.
That's all the best director nominees. Is that the question, right? I think so.
The directors of the Best Picture nominees.
Oh my God, I didn't get that far. Sorry.
Okay, that's okay. That was a good start.
Thank you.
Yes, I'll just go through mine real quick. For American Fiction, I said Alexander Payne. Makes sense.
Sure.
Anatomy of a Fall, I said Yorgos Lanthimos.
European.
Yeah. Barbie, I struggled a little bit, but I was like, let's put Celine Song. Let's see Celine Song's Barbie.
Sure.
I think it should be directed by a woman in general.
I do think that's correct.
Yeah. The Holdovers, I said Cora Jefferson.
Ooh, interesting. All right.
Switching them. Yeah. Killers of the Flower Moon, I said Jonathan Glazer.
That was one of my first thoughts too. I thought that would align well.
Maestro, I said Martin Scorsese. He
was a producer, so clearly it was of interest to him. New York, he loves the place.
Exactly. Yes. Oh yeah. Oppenheimer, I just thought this would be a fun challenge, but Bradley Cooper.
Okay. I mean, it would look great. We know that.
It would look great.
Yeah.
Yep. Bringing in Matthew Libatique for sure. Past Lives, Greta Gerwig.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. At least that kind of like Francis Ha era.
And there's humor in Past Lives. It's a funny movie. The audience I saw it with was laughing not infrequently.
Yep. And then the other two I agree with. Poor Things, Justine Triet. I also think that film would benefit from a female director. And The Zone of Interest, Christopher Nolan. Yeah.
Makes sense.
Would have been very different, but
any of
Yeah.
those. Don't know if they'd be better
Yeah.
or worse, but
So, Owen Daly, with only 4 performances nominated, not from these nominees, which of Nyad, Rustin, or The Color Purple do you think was closest to being nominated for picture?
easily The Color Purple. No
Yeah,
question. Rustin was
no question.
lucky to get more than one nomination. I think its song nomination was always pretty secure for that boring ass song. But
It did not get
oh, it
nominated.
didn't. Oh my God, right. I just pulled up the nominees.
So,
Hooray. Okay, well
not as
then
secure as we thought, perhaps.
Rustin as a one nominee makes a lot of sense. I don't think it had any other chances besides song, which you're now telling me it didn't actually get. Interesting. I guess I'm just used to being disappointed in that category, which there were still disappointments in that category. Don't worry.
It's a yearly tradition. Yep.
Um, although I will say that probably is Diane Warren's best song in 2 decades. So thank you, Cheetos.
Yeah.
But Color Purple had the SAG Ensemble nomination. It had a Critics' Choice nomination for Best Picture. It had the most Best Picture sheen around it. It's obviously a
Yes.
remake of a property that was previously nominated for Best Picture. I think unquestionably of those 3 films, that was the closest.
Yeah. And definitely not Nyad. I don't think it had any Best Picture heat.
No, and I have weird affection for Nyad. I think it's funny, and I do think Jodie Foster is exceptional in it. But
Yes.
Color Purple also had the best reviews, I think, of all 3 of those.
Yeah. Kind of by default, but yes.
Sure. Yeah, I don't think any of those are achievements, really, but sure.
Yeah. Well, actually, both Sean and Renee want to know why The Color Purple didn't break into this lineup.
I think there's a few factors here. The box office was not quite what it was expected to or hoped to be. I remember it being huge on opening day on Christmas, if I recall correctly, and then quickly tapering off. I don't think it ever approached 100 million. And the reviews were good, but not great. I think it is far inferior to the Spielberg one, which is disappointing because part of the appeal of this was that it was actually being told by a Black director. But I don't think it was very well directed, which is frustrating. And I think the performances are pretty great, but I just think as a film itself, it wasn't super well executed. It also doesn't help that, and this is the weird thing about The Color Purple as a musical, the stage musical is not that great. You know, the original production, if I can put on my Broadway hat for a second, the original production in 2006 was well regarded enough, mostly for the performances, but the score was never really talked about with great excess. And then there was a 2016 revival, which is what made Cynthia Erivo into a star. And that production was so well regarded, specifically the performances and the direction, that it kind of redefined Color Purple in the cultural consciousness, at least for those who were aware it existed as a musical. And that the movie does not get made without that production. It just doesn't. And so I think a lot of people saw the Color Purple movie musical and were kind of struck that the songs are just okay, which I would agree with.
Yeah.
There's 1 or 2 good numbers in there, but I don't think it does anything that the original Spielberg movie does better at all. So
yeah,
that's frustrating. Also, the box office was not that great. And the 10 movies that we got for Best Picture were all higher in terms of regard or Best Picture, or box office. So it wasn't like there was a slot that was yearning for just kind of something else to come in here. It was a pretty locked in 10.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a great ensemble. I even wish Taraji P. Henson got more credit for her performance, honestly. But yeah, the direction just felt off to me. I don't know, the differences of the musical sequences and the actual narrative just felt off somehow. So not my favorite, unfortunately.
No.
I think it was just a disappointment.
It's very imbalanced. And I love musical theater with all my heart and soul. It's my favorite art form. So I'm always rooting for any musical that makes it to the big screen, but I do at the same time hold them in a high standard because of that. And this did not clear it. Yep. Fantasia Barrino was also excellent. She made my Best Actress personal roster, so I hope she gets more work in the future as an actor.
Yeah. Well, let's get to our should have been a contender segment here. What were your top contenders that you thought should have been Best Picture nominated, but were not, whether they could have been or not?
Right. So, like I said, my top films weren't far off from Best Picture. I think they kind of nailed it. That being said, the best films that I saw that weren't nominated for Best Picture, let me just pull my list here. May December is for me the best film that was not in the best picture lineup of the year. It was just such an incredible movie. Maybe my favorite Todd Haynes. It's up there for sure.
Yep.
Three fantastic performances. Natalie Portman was my personal Best Actress winner. Charles Melton
Wow.
should have been nominated. Like, my God.
Yeah.
I'm so glad it managed to get into screenplay as the only non-Best Picture nominee. I would have obviously voted for it. Love, love, love that movie. Asteroid City. I don't know what the Academy's issue with Wes Anderson is, and I know he literally won an Oscar this year.
Right.
But I don't know why Grand Budapest is the only film of his meticulously designed movies that can break into any category besides writing. And Asteroid City got nothing. I thought it was a phenomenal film. So well written. It looked amazing as always. Just one of Wes Anderson's best. Really loved it. The Boy and the
Yeah.
Heron, I'm so glad it got the win it did. I did not think that was going to happen all the way up to them opening the envelope, but I was so happy I was wrong. Uh, I really love Passages. One of the more
Yeah.
crazy, like 11 a.m. screenings I had at Sundance that year. That was a wild thing to eat a croissant during. Um, really loved The Killer and Ferrari from our really established auteur directors, and Knock at the Cabin. Speaking of another favorite auteur.
Yeah.
And then finally, The Iron Claw. Really fantastic
Mm.
late in the season film. I think if it had been completed a little earlier and had managed to get into some festivals, it would have had a chance for some awards. I don't really know where. Maybe at least the ensemble at SAG, that should have happened, or even something like editing, or maybe a lone director nomination, who knows? But that movie was just fantastic, and I think it will have a good legacy going forward.
Yeah. I agree with a lot of those picks, especially May December. As a Todd Haynes super fan, that is just another one that really felt like fan service for me personally.
Yeah.
I love a good character study, and I wish it got more love from the industry. I think, as many people have said, I think its depiction of actors as kind of leeches, perhaps, on real life people and situations may have hit a nerve for some actors, perhaps. I don't know. Just speculating. But yeah, glad it got that screenplay nomination. Perfect Days, I really responded to. Wim Wenders, fantastic film, and Koji Yakusho is phenomenal.
Incredible.
I remember it was not a guarantee it would be nominated for international feature, but that was a great, pleasant surprise. Speaking of which, Robot Dreams, which totally devastated me personally. Really connected to that one as well. So was over the moon when it got that animated feature nomination. Films that should have gotten any kind of Oscar love, All of Us Strangers, certainly another super emotional one. Andrew Scott.
Yeah. Andrew Scott gave the performance of the year, if you're asking me. Just incredible work.
Yeah. And screenplay nomination, I think, should have been on the table too.
That was I would put money down that if Barbie was an original, or I think it should have been, then All of Us Strangers gets into adapted.
Yeah. And 1001, I think Tiana Taylor was robbed of a nomination. It's more her nomination than picture necessarily, but excellent directorial debut from A.V. Rockwell. So, yeah, it's a pretty good year of cinema, I must say. Not just Hollywood, but worldwide cinema.
I would agree. It's a lot of 8, 9, and 10s out of 10s for me this year, which is not always the case.
Yeah. Well, let's get to our final segment, where we will reveal whether we think Oppenheimer deserved to win, or if it should have been Poor Things, or if not Poor Things, a secret third option, perhaps. So, Cody, you've already made your proclamation about Oppenheimer, so not a surprise you would pick that over Poor Things, correct?
I would, yes. I would vote for Oppenheimer. I'm a boring Oscar voter, but I would have had a tough time maybe not strategically voting for Zone of Interest as somebody who loved that film. One of those, like, I know Oppenheimer's going to win, but I wanted to be Zone of Interest, which we've seen that thinking lead to surprise Oscar wins. So maybe if I had a ballot, I would be a little bit more sneaky about my favorite.
Fair enough. Makes sense. I would definitely be a sneaky Oscar voter as well. So just saying, very gaming out the whole system of it. But yes, between the two, very glad that Oppenheimer was the winner. Definitely would have gotten my vote between them. And I think if Poor Things was the runner-up, it was a distant runner-up. But if I had a vote, I think it would go to Zone of Interest, which, yeah, I think that is truly the achievement of the year that will have a legacy more so even than Oppenheimer and other films on this list. So, did you have a ranking of the Best Picture nominees just to sort of close this out?
Kevin,
I'm sure you have another list.
did I have a ranking? Come
Can't
on.
believe. I just didn't know if you were tired at this point and you were like, whatever, let's just.
I
end
always
this
have
thing.
time for lists. Don't worry.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
I would go. Number 1 is Oppenheimer. Obviously, number 2 is Zone of Interest. Very clear, I think. And then 3 Past Lives. Those are that's the top tier for me. And then the next tier is like very good. So that's Barbie 4, 5 Killers of the Flower Moon, 6 Poor Things, 7 Holdovers, 8 Anatomy of a Fall. And then there's the last 2. I go back and forth here. I think they're very obvious bottom tier for me. But I do think because there is a bit more intentionality with the filmmaking, these are 2 movies I have problems with, but I think I would put Maestro slightly above American Fiction. I give them the same number rating. It's like splitting hairs for me. It's a race to the bottom, truly. But again, in a lot of years, these would be like middle tier of the nominees.
Yeah.
Again, in 2011, they were maybe 3 and 4. Who knows?
Makes sense. Good list. I have a slightly different order. My number 1 would be The Zone of Interest. 2, Killers of the Flower Moon. 3, Anatomy of a Fall. 4, The Holdovers. 5, Past Lives. 6, Barbie. 7, Oppenheimer. 8, Maestro. 9, Poor Things. And 10, American Fiction.
Wow, I am surprised about the Poor Things ranking. I didn't anticipate that.
Yeah, neither did I on a rewatch. So here we are. It was definitely higher when I first watched it.
Yep.
So
I think
there
that's
you
going to
go.
be
But-
repeated by a lot of people who rewatch it. I think once the newness of it falls off, it doesn't reveal as much as it wants to.
Yes, agreed. But this was such a good time, Cody. Thank you so much for another incredible 3+ hour deep dive into the Oscars. Always fun chatting hours and hours of Oscars with you. So thank you.
Thanks again for having me, Kevin. Always love being on this show. I'm really excited to see your Best Actress exploration continue, and I'm following along.
Yes, you are.
I have an insane
Love it.
list on Letterboxd of every single nominee so far, up to,
Yeah.
I believe I'm at 2008 personally right now. So yeah, it's been great following along with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Where could people find more of you on the internet?
I'm all over the internet at CodyMonster91. You can find my writing and podcasting at Next Best Picture, and I write at AwardWatch. And you can find my horror movie podcast, Halloweeners, at any place you get podcasts, and we're on social media at HalloweenersPod.
And thank you all so much for listening. You could find me at Twitter at Kevin_Jacobson, and the show's at Oscar Runner-Up. Instagram and the Runner-Up is rate, review, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you like what you heard and want to hear more, go to patreon.com/andtherunnerup is for a whole bunch of bonus episodes. A brand new season of the Best Actress series is coming soon, covering the lineups of the 2010s. The season premiere of that will be on October 9th. So until then, thanks again, Cody.
Thank you, Kevin.
And I will bid you all adieu.